Hello everyone. This is your friend from Naruto Audio Fanfics, and we are back once again with a brand new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto Uzumaki was reborn in flames at the Valley of the End and awakened the power of the Phoenix Naruto times Kurenai times Anko times Tamari, Part 3. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to hit the like button, thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel for more amazing Naruto fanfics like this. So without wasting any more time, let's start today's fanfic. The only people who know Naruto has had multiple lifetimes is the third, Anko, Kurenai, Jiraiya, Tsunade, Shizune, and Rin. They all have sworn secrecy not to tell to keep from screwing the timeline up. Kakashi never knew Kurenai and Anko were actually condizoring relationship with Naruto before he left or until he came back. When asked about the rings, both ladies would say it was a late birthday present from a friend. Kakashi also does not know how strong Naruto is or been to his house up to this point. Tamari also has seen Naruto's memories of her, but he made her swear not to tell even her brothers. After she saw what happens with Gaara and everything, she agrees out of respect. End notes. There is an old saying, the more things change the more they stay the same. It has been 1 month since Naruto became a genin. Team 7 changed a little at first. Actually, just the first day would be more accurate, and it started like this. Naruto arrived where his team was supposed to meet at the Hokage office. Kakashi was there already with a mission scroll and said, "Okay, now that you are all here, our mission is to catch the Firelord's cat Tora. Let's go." They followed him outside and walked to where the cat liked to go after it escaped. Sakura saw the cat and screamed, "Sasuke-kun, there it is," pointing to the cat. The cat saw them and started to run. Sasuke and Sakura started after it, and Kakashi looked at them and then at Naruto and said, "You know you need to help your team, right?" Naruto said, "I know, but I also know something else." Kakashi said, "What's that?" Naruto said, "This." And he created Tenkabunshin and had them turn into a male cat and had them start chasing Tora. Kakashi's sweat dropped and said, "What will that do?" Naruto smirked and said, "You ever see what a cat will do when it's in heat but don't want to be messed with? Especially when male cats are after it." Kakashi said, "No." Naruto said, "Watch." 20 seconds later, "God damn you, you cat. I am going to kill you." Sasuke screamed. "Get off of Sasuke-kun's face, you stupid cat." Sakura screamed and both of them came back into the clearing with the cat still scratching Sasuke. Kakashi looked at Naruto and said, "That was mean." Naruto said, "When in that situation, the cat will go for the highest point it could get." This case was Sasuke face. Kakashi sighed as the cats continued to claw Sasuke. They made their way back to the tower and turned in the cat. Kakashi looked around and said, "Well, that was a good start, but we need to work on our teamwork." Dismissed. And he left in a swirl of leaves. When Naruto got home, he heard something echoing throughout the house and started looking. He found the room that it was coming from, and it was his mom's room. He started to reach for the doorknob until he heard, "Harder, harder, I want more, give it to me, Kakashi. I am almost there, I am going to." Naruto paled at that and started to back away. Unfortunately, that triggered a tripline he failed to see and was suddenly hit in the back by a giant rubber mallet and knocked into the door. When he hit the door, he flew through it. The door, instead of opening like a regular door, had a bar going through it that caused it to flip over like a fan blade and caused Naruto to fly into his mom's room. Once inside, his legs were wrapped in ninja wire and he was pulled upside down. Once he was upside down, he was hit in the face with a whipped cream pie. After the pie fell off, he was covered in honey flower and feathers. After he finally stopped moving and the traps were done, he looked over and saw his mom sitting in a beach chair drinking a glass of tea, and beside her was Kakashi also sitting in a beach chair with his arms crossed, and you could tell he was smiling behind that damn mask. Rin looked at Naruto and said, "So is my editor going to call off the little bounty on Kakashi's face?" Naruto sighed and said, "Yes. How long have you both been setting this up?" Rin said, "From the moment you left Kakashi's house the day we arrived. The little act at the school and Kakashi being on time was all a ploy to trick you, son." Naruto said, "Damn it. Fine. You win." Kakashi said, "By the way, I like your library. I got a few jutsu out of it. How many do you know?" Naruto said, "Enough." "Which ones?" Kakashi nodded and said, Your mom let me look at them and I only picked 2 Raiden Jutsu. I already know so many I don't really want any new ones. I did pick Raiden, Thundershock and Raiden, Dragon Missile. I am curious how you got the Chidori though. Naruto said. Dad left me a copy of all the jutsu in the Forbidden Scroll and Chidori was in it. I can do it but only 1 time a day. My affinities are wind, earth, water, and wood. Also the reason there are so many jutsu in there since the Kazama Estates was destroyed and I did not want to mess with the idiots too much I started a new family jutsu library. Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Shizune gave me a lot of jutsu and in our travels I would buy or trade some low-level jutsu I had bought with money I won off of Tsunade. I probably only know enough to make me a chunin though. I got tree climbing and water walking down. Kakashi nodded and said, I like the idea of starting a family library since you got 2 of the most sought-after women in the village going to marry you I hear. I don't know how the hell you pulled that one off. I also hear you got a 3rd one from another village. It's good you know some decent jutsu then as well as the chakra exercises. Now I don't really have to train your team. As you probably guess I only originally became a sensei to train the Uchiha because of the council. After I saw you were back I was actually going to train you but seeing as you already are probably Junin status in knowledge and just need experience I will go back to doing what I want. If you need any real help though let me know. Thanks again for the laughs Rin. I hope we can do it again sometimes. Naruto said. Do me one favor please. Don't teach him Rasengan or Chidori. I know all about his brother and his mental instability. The 3rd sent some info to the old hag and Erozenin about it. I think if he sees someone who might be truly stronger than him he might try and kill them. Kakashi nodded and said, I agree with you and I would never teach anyone Rasengan. As far as I am concerned that is you're in your clans even though I do have to wonder how you know I knew Rasengan. Naruto said. Jiraiya when he was teaching me said I asked a question about the control you had mentioned when trying to work on a jutsu. He knew just by that discussion which one it had to be. Kakashi nodded and said. I need to be going. Rin said. Sure thing Kakashi. Well have dinner sometime. CYA Kakashi. Kakashi left in a swirl of leaves and Rin said. You may have your father's looks but I gave you your prankster side son. Don't mess with a master. And she cut him down and said. Now clean up the mess. As she walked out the room. After that missions with Team 7 went like they originally would. Kakashi was 3 hours late but instead of getting lost on the road of life he was with Rin hanging out and enjoying company though it was just friends. Missions were boring except Naruto almost always found a way to speed them up or show he was better than Sasuke which made him pissed. Sakura had spent all her time following Sasuke and yet she failed to notice him getting upset. Kurenai and Anko had both been avoiding him but not to be mean. No. Anko was getting a lot of ABNU mission sites she was part of Ibiki's interrogation department. When Mizuki tried to break in to steal the Forbidden Scroll he was caught quickly by an anonymous tip. After that Ibiki was able to break him and they got a few leads on Orochimaru dealings and a few other shady people. Kurenai would have seen Naruto but Hinata was kicked out of the Hyuga compound by her father. Without Naruto presence originally to give her courage she was even more depressed and mentally weak. Kurenai had her move into her house to keep an eye on her. It just was dumb luck that she was kicked out on graduation day from the academy. When her father heard the Uchiha had beaten her in class was the final straw. Naruto sent them flowers and gifts and also whenever he saw either in passing stopping to see how they were doing. Anko's free time was mostly sleeping and catching up the things that had to be done in everyday life so she was not happy about that but the occasional run-ins with Naruto helped. Anko also because of the memory genjutsu she had was able to also get more info from suspected traitors. Kurenai had been helping Hinata with her confidence and did not want to be distracted helping the poor girl out so Naruto gave them privacy but the Runins still helped them know they still loved each other. Somehow the council heard about Naruto claims to be the Yondium's son and the Hokage was forced to tell the truth. After that it also became knowledge of who his grandparents were as well as his bloodline. The reactions were mixed and some of the council tried to use their power to have some control put on him. Flashback. The council was divided about how powerful Naruto might be. Those who still hated him because of the Kyuubi tried to get rid of him and they were now discussing the issue. A civilian said, he is a threat and the demon could be take over. Inoichi said, The Yondaime would not have took a risk like that with his own flesh and blood if he was not sure it would hold. Danzo said. He should be properly trained and turned into a weapon of the village. Tsunade and Jiraiya, who were in Thier clan seats as well as Rin for the Kazama clan, were becoming pissed, and Tsunade said, "Enough. I am saying this once and only once. Any actions to harm him or anyone close to him will invoke the laws of this village charter and our clan will use its authority." Danzo said. What nonsense is this? The third, already being aware of this from Naruto, said, Tsunade's clan owns everything from the south gates to the academy and the Hokage Mountain. No matter what buildings are on it, they own all rights to them, including the building we are in. If they so choose, they can force everyone who lives or own business in them to leave and have the backing of the Fire Lords and the other clans of Konoha that would be forced to side with them or lose all right to Thier lands and homes. In other words, it would be anyone who was on Thier lands against the clans of Konoha. As for making him a weapon, Danzo, he is also protected by the same laws, so you can't touch him. Funny thing is, the council member who called him a demon a few minutes ago could be executed for breaking my law, but I think I would rather tell you this. By the time he is 16, the demon inside him will be gone. End flashback. After that, things calmed down some. A few people left town, but nobody important. The major speed bump was about a week after team assignments. Flashback. Rin was at the grocery store getting supplies for the family. She was getting ready to check on when she smelled something and turned and saw her sister standing at the doorway, leaning on the doorframe with her arms looking at her. After getting her stuff, she pulled out a scroll Naruto had made and set it on the counter and put the items on top of it, and all the items automatically sealed inside it. Picking up the scroll, she walked over to her sister. Sum said, "So I see my little sister finally returned. I heard some interesting things from my son." Rin said, "Really, sister? What would those be?" Acting all innocent and not knowing what she might mean. Sum narrowed her eyes and said, "Is it true you married the Yondaime and had that little mutt?" Rin said, well, I see someone still upset that her younger sister was better than her at everything and was going to be clan head. I mean, I beat you at all of our little spars, next I find a man who is better than almost all men, and then I have a son who's even better than yours and you can't handle it. Perhaps I am not the biggest bitch anymore, or maybe I should put you down for good." As she turned to walk away smirking. Sum was pissed at her sister and extended her nails with chakra and swipped at Rin, who ducked under the swipe and grabbed Sum by the hair and said, "Guess I am after all the biggest bitch, runt," and kicked her in the face, sending her into the air, grabbing her feet and throwing her head first into the ground. Sum slowly got up, panting with a busted nose and a smile, and said, "It's good to see you're still tough as ever, sis. I am still sorry for what the clan did. I think you made the right choice. You and Naruto should come by sometime. I wish I would have known back then he was your son, though. I could have protected him." Rin smiled and said, "We might, but give us a little time. We are still settling back in. Also, it's probably best you did not know. If you would have protected him, it could have started a clan war and you had to think about what's best for the pack. It's good too." Just then 4ABNU appeared and a horse-faced one said, "What's going on here? Are you causing trouble, Kazama?" With venom as his voice. Sum said, "Relax ABNU, or I might just have the Hokage bust you back to Genin for messing with me and my sister." The horse ABNU flinched and said, "Just don't disturb the peace any longer or I will run you both in." Rin snorted and said, "Please, you could not even touch us, much less run us both in." The horse ABNU said, "We shall say. Mark my words." And with that, all four of them left and Rin and Sum both started laughing, and Rin said, "Don't mess with the big dogs." Sum laughed and said, "Especially when they are a pair of bitches like us. Well, I have to go. CYA around sometime, sis." And left in a swirl of leaves. End flashback. Naruto sighed as he was standing bored in the Hokage's office, and the third said, "Right, Team 7, I think you are ready for a higher rank mission. It's an escort mission, send him in." An old man with a bottle of sake walked in and said, "Is this all I get for my money?" The blonde looks like he's about to fall asleep, as he raises his bottle to take a drink only to have it disappear. Suddenly, before anyone could tell, an "Ahhhhhh, that was good," was heard, and everyone saw Naruto turning the sake bottle upside down empty. Sakura said, "Are you sure you're not an alcoholic?" Naruto snorted and said, like I told you, it's physically impossible for me to get drunk. I just really like the taste, and the old man has spilled more of this sake on his cloths than he has in his mouth. I just hated to see it go to waste. Tazana was wide-eyed but quickly hid it and said, right. My name is Tazana and I have a bridge to build. You are to protect me back home and until the bridge is complete. Kakashi nodded and said, right. Meet at the west gate in 1 hour. Just then Team 8 walked in and Kiba said, mission complete. He looked over and said, hey Kus, you ready to see who's top dog yet? Naruto snorted and said, Chunin exams Kus, we got a C rank mission to head on. Kiba screamed, what? I demand that we also get one Hokage-sama. The Hokage looked at the teams and said, I am sorry but we don't have any more missions for you a Genin team today. Naruto cleared his throat and said, Hokage-sama, perhaps it would be a good chance to work on our teamwork with another team. Who knows what we might encounter on this mission? The third narrowed his eyes in thought and Sasuke said, Dobi, we don't need another team to slow us down. You just want them to go so you can go with your WH. He was cut off by a focus shot of Ki coming from Naruto and said in a neutral voice, Sasuke, we are teammates and I value your skills and opinions on mission-related items but never insult a friend or someone precious to me. I did not make the suggestion for personal reason. If I had I would have requested a mission with Sarahime also. No, the reason I stated is what I meant. We may sometime have to work with another team and if we never get experience in doing that then who knows what will happen when we actually need it. Cutting the Ki. The third said, I agree that Naruto does raise a valid point and it would be good. Naruto turned toward the village gate's directions fast enough to make everyone think an attack was happening when he jumped back 5 feet from where he was standing and a swirl of sand appeared in the Hokage office and a very pissed off looking Gaara was standing in the office. The third said, what is the meaning of this interruption and who are you? As everyone was getting into a defensive position. Naruto said, Gaara, what are you doing here and why alone? Gaara said, brother, we need to talk privately, now. Naruto nodded and said, Hokage-sama, can we have a few minutes to talk? Gaara is the Kage's son and if he is here it's important. The third nodded and said, would everyone leave the room but Naruto and Gaara? Everyone nodded and left with Tazuna and when the door closed Naruto said, what's wrong? Gaara said, your information was correct. The Sound Village did plan to kill my father. He was able to defend himself against 20 of their men. He survived because my team was on our way back when I sensed his chakra fighting others. Tamari and Konkuro are both in the hospital in Suna right now and the only thing keeping us from declaring an all-out war on them now is because there have been an attempt on my family's life in the hospital already. They just have chakra exhaustion so don't worry. We were told that we either help them destroy you or an assassin will get our family. Naruto's fists were opening and closing and the third said, what does the Kage plan to do now? Gaara said, we plan to go with the plan we are with them but aid you and your village when the time comes but we also plan to aid Kazama clan since we have an alliance with them. The third sighed and said, very well. I trust that since are here and the only person who could detect you in advance was Naruto then that means this is a secret mission. Gaara nodded and Naruto said, right Gaara, tell Tamari, I love her and can't wait to see her and I promise you brother, we will get them. Gaara just shook his head once and was gone in a swirl of sand. The third sighed and said, Orochimaru must be desperate to try and blackmail the Kage. Naruto nodded and said, the fact he is still alive now mean that my information is not as reliable. Probably the fact Tsunade and Jiraiya are here permanently has him on edge and he knows he needs a major distraction like Shukaku to help him. The third nodded and said, I understand and we will still prepare with the info you gave me. He can't change too much of his plans or he runs the risk of us finding out. The assassination attempts must be a backup plan. Go ahead and bring everyone back and I will make up a story. Naruto nodded and got everyone and the third said, sorry about the interruption. Now Team 7 go ahead with your mission as planned. Team 8, I would send you with Team 7 but I need your team for a mission that just came up. I will have the further details later for tomorrow. As for our guest, do not mention he was here. Sasuke said. Why was he here and why did the Dobi here get to stay and I didn't? Naruto said. He's here because my grandfather sent a present to my fiancée who was his sister and he came to defend her honor. He was still opening his hand and closing it, but only the third and Kakashi and Kurenai noticed it. Kakashi said, "Right, meet at the south gates in 1 hour, dismissed." And he left in a swirl of leaves. Naruto turned to Kiba and said, "See ya, dog breath. Till we meet Aegean Sensei Heim." Kissing her hand, making everyone sweat drop except Sakura, who was screaming kawaii, and Kurenai, who blushed. Actually, the third and Kakashi were having perverted giggles, and Hinata looked on with mixed feeling of loneliness and self-doubt. He then left in a swirl of flames to get ready. Sasuke said, "I demand someone tell me how he does that." Kurenai said, "Only he can do that. It has to do with his bloodline." Sasuke said, "Then it's useless," and walked off to get ready. Sakura following to also get ready. When Naruto arrived at the south gates, his team and Tazuna was already there. Naruto attire had changed though. He had on a pair of black-blue jean shorts and a Junin-type vest with his sword strapped on his back. Sasuke looked over and said, "Do you really know how to use that thing, or is it for show?" Naruto said, "You won't know unless I need it," as he took off toward Wave. Sakura said, "Naruto, get back here, you don't know the way to Wave Country." Naruto said, "Actually, Sakura, I was there about 4 years ago. Some guy named Gato was trying to buy all the shipping rights at the time." "What a?" And enjoyed the reaction to the name Gato from Tazuna as everyone continued the mission. About 2 hours later, Naruto saw a puddle of water in the road and stopped and said, "Hey Bevis and Butthead, get you asses out of there, or Zabuza going to kick you asses, or I might do it for him, Aegean." Sakura and Sasuke looked at him like he was crazy, and Kakashi was sweat dropping. Suddenly the puddle shifted and 2 men slowly rose out of it and looked pale and said, "Naruto, what are you doing here?" in a stuttery voice. Naruto snorted and said, "Okay, who's the idiot who hired Zabuza?" The taller one said, "Gato, he hired us to kill the old man there." "Please don't kill us," Naruto said. "Kakashi, talk to the client please and see if he can tell us anything else. Me and my colleges are going to have a little chat." Kakashi nodded and said, "You know they are missing Nin's right?" Naruto said, "They are also spies for Jiraiya." Kakashi nodded and Naruto said, "Tell Zabuza and Haku to meet us on the road when we get to Wave, and don't try any of that scare shit or I will bitch slap both of them. Now go." And both men nodded before jumping away, walking over to Kakashi and said, "We got an inside informant later." Kakashi said, "You know I will have to take you in when we get back to face the Hokage." Naruto said, "Yes, but I am going to talk Zabuza into coming back with us." Kakashi said, "Why did they act so scarred around you?" Sasuke stormed over before he had a chance to say anything and said, "Hey Dobi, how come you told Kakashi what to do and what was up with those guys? How did you know they were there?" Naruto sweat dropped and said, "Sakura, when was the last time it rained?" Sakura said, 2 weeks ago. Why? Naruto said, "And how long do you think a puddle of water could last with the heat we had the past 2 weeks on a road?" Causing both of them to sweat drop. Naruto muttered, "Idiots," and continued walking, and Kakashi said, "We don't have to continue the mission since the client lied." Naruto said, "Question Kakashi, what was Tazana's reaction when I mentioned Gato when we left the village 2 hours ago?" Kakashi said, "Truthfully, I don't know." Naruto slapped his forehead, and faster than anyone could see, the book in Kakashi's hand was vaporized in flames, and a click was heard coming from Naruto, who was removing his hand from his sword. It left 3 people with their mouths open and Kakashi weeping on the ground. They continued on their mission. Naruto smiled as he thought back to 1 year ago. Flashback. Naruto was currently in Rain Country working on a modified Rasengan that could incorporate ice. Since he has an affinity to wind and water and earth, he can make wood out of earth and water, or ice out of wind and water, but that is also harder. He was getting ready to take a break when he felt a presence arrive and said, "Hello stranger, can I help you with something?" A person who looked like a girl walked over and said, "I was wondering, are you able to do that because of a bloodline?" Naruto said, "Yes and no, Haku," as he turned to her. Haku asked, "How do you know my name?" Naruto smiled and said, "My name is Naruto Kazama and I am the son of Arashi Kazama, the Yellow Flash. My grandfather is the Toad Sanin Jiraiya and also one of my teachers." I have currently training but have yet to find a kenjutsu teacher to help me with my style, and I am also looking for someone to help with ice jutsu. My grandfather was able to discover through his spy network about you and him. I have a scroll for you and your master for a proposal as well as a small sign of my interest. There is $100,000 sealed with the proposal as well as instructions to meet me and him to discuss the deal face to face. I just was waiting till I found you to give it. May I? Pointing toward his pocket. Haku, who was reaching for her sanbons and also starting one hand signs, nodded, and Naruto slowly reached for a scroll and pulled it out, handing it to her with both hands so she could see he was not attacking. Haku slowly reached for it and Naruto flamed Shushin away. The next day Jiraiya and Naruto were at the same spot when Zabuza walked over with Haku and said, "So what exactly is this deal?" Naruto said, "Simple. I am currently on a training trip with my family, and as I told Haku, I am the son of Arashi Kazama, the Yellow Flash of Konoha. As you already know, my father had a lot of enemies and who would like nothing more than to kill me for being his son. I will not live a life afraid, so I am learning from the best in each field I can. Jiraiya here. My grandfather has heard of you and your assistant, and one of the 7 swordsmen would be a great kenjutsu teacher, and I would also like to learn a few ice jutsu since I can use ice as well as wood. I propose a 1-month lesson to help me with my style. In exchange, you will receive $500,000 debited into 1/4 each week of the month. At the end of the month, Jiraiya would also like to offer you a yearly bonus of $100,000 per year on any info you come across that would affect either the Kazama family or Konoha. Simple knowledge, and you can just send it through a secure messenger. You can also tell Tweedledee and Dumb in the woods behind me I can kill them easily, as I had this place set in case you decided to attack first and ask question later. So Demon of the Mist, what do you say? I will even have my grandmother throw in some medical jutsu for Haku there for free." Zabuza looked at him and said, "Who's your grandmother?" A person walked out of the woods and said, "My name is Tsunade of the Sanins." Zabuza paled and said, "Kid, I like your style, having 2 of the world's most dangerous people train you and then wanting me also. Fine, but only after you fight me in a kenjutsu battle to see if you have any skills." End flashback. Naruto chuckled to himself as they kept walking. About 5 o'clock that evening, an ice mirror appeared in the middle of the road and out stepped 2 people, and Kakashi was about to say something when Naruto said, "So I see you nose is fixed, huh, Zabuza?" Zabuza said, "I still don't know how the hell you pulled that one off, kid. So what do you want?" Naruto said, "Simple. What's dipshit paying you?" Zabuza said, 10,000. Why? Naruto said, "He got any kind of security beside you and your men?" Zabuza said, "About 200 merc. Not much for someone like you." Naruto mocked hurt and said, "Well, sorry for pissing the Mist Village off." Zabuza started to laugh and said, "Is that what you called it? You know they gave you a nickname for disposing of over 1,200 ninja in one attack. They have a bounty on your head for $2 billion. Kakashi looking at Naruto and asked, "What are they calling him?" Naruto sighed and said, "I guess I will have to tell the story. It all started when I was getting ready to finish my training under Zabuza." Flashback. Zabuza. "Okay, kid, let's see what you feel that." Naruto turned toward the village they were staying in and said, "Yes, feels like someone's getting ready to attack." They both took off toward the village, and when they got there, they saw the entire village was surrounded by mist ninja. Naruto said, "Shit, my family and Haku's in there. We have to help them." Zabuza said, "What do you got in mind? It looks like most of Mist is here." Naruto looked at the field and said, "You see any women in the group, Zabuza?" Zabuza looked at him and said, "No, why?" Naruto got a fox grin, and Zabuza done learned meant he was going to do something. Naruto said, "I got an idea, but Gambunta is going to kill my grandfather later." And he hanged into Jiraiya and quickly summoned Gambunta. Gambunta said, "What do you want, pervert?" Jiraiya said, "I need you to perform a combination transformation, Konbi Henge, to save the village," in Jiraiya voice. Gambunta nodded and Jiraiya changed. End flashback. Zabuza interrupts and said, he had music start playing all over the area singing "I Am Too" as he turned the frog into a 200 feet blonde female with pigtails and only being barely covered with 2 whiffs of smoke. The entire army was knocked out from blood loss. That is how he became known as the Blonde. Naruto smiled as everyone looked at him and he said, "What can I say? If you got it, use it." Zabuza said, "So you obviously did not call me here for a social call, what do you want?" Naruto sighed and said, "I will triple what Gato's paying you to act hurt until the bridge is almost complete and keep an eye out on the little pest. Should something change, Haku knows how to get to me. When you decide to attack, put frost on the windows of the house. We draw Gato out. You help us kill him and his men. You get paid. Wave gets bridge. Everyone's happy but Gato. Then you and your men can decide on joining Konoha since your term is almost up, or you can continue being a missing nin and we still pay you for your service." Zabuza nodded and said, "Fine. See you soon, kid." As he left, Sakura said, "He's pulling our leg right." Naruto smirked and said, "I will let you wonder about that, let's go." Naruto was pissed as he looked at the last 3 men in front of him who all stood ready to attack, and he asked himself, "How the hell did I get myself into this shit? Oh yeah, the little dipshit over there. Looking at the Gato standing behind his 200 merc." Flashback. After Team 7 made it to Tazana's house, everyone was watching him and Sasuke was brooding as usual. Since Kakashi did not have to fight, he decided to begin tree climbing early. Since Naruto already knew it, he got guard duty for the week. The week went by quickly. Unfortunately, the damn Uchiha prick had activated his Sharingan, making him think he's a god. The only reason he activated it was when he was doing the tree climbing, he let his anger flare and blew himself off the tree and toward the Sakura, who was on the ground admiring her crush after her first time up the tree, trimming her fingernails with a kunai so she could look nice for him. When she heard the explosion, she looked up and stuck her kunai upwards, making it look like she was attacking him. Unfortunately, thanks to the pink-haired bimbo, when Sasuke saw it, he got scared and activated it, allowing himself to dodge. The bridge was almost complete when Zabuza and Haku arrived and looked like shit. Naruto asked, "What happened and where's the brothers?" Zabuza, who was being treated by Haku, said, "That damn prick Gato heard when they came and told me and Haku you were coming. He double-crossed us and sent for ninja from the mist and told them I was here also with you. They attacked us and there was 20 of them, but we got some of them, but the rest will be coming for you probably at the bridge." Kakashi sighed and said, "Will you help us?" Zabuza said, "Yes, the kid here has helped us many times and I would like to see Gato pay for this." Sakura asked, "Why are you helping them, Naruto?" "They're missing nin." Zabuza said, "I am only a missing nin." After the Mizukage began to fear the 7 swordsmen. The people started to respect us more than him, so he attacked us with his personal guards. I don't know if any of the others survived, but after that we went on the run and he said we attacked him. That's why I am a missing nin. I plan to return and clear our name and remove the Mizukage, but sadly looks like it won't happen." Naruto said, "Sakura, what was the first lesson Kakashi tried to teach us? Look underneath the underneath. Not everything is as it appears." After explained how he had overheard Zabuza and the demon brothers talking about the blonde and how he had heard about the reward for him. Being the greedy little shit he is, he sent a message to Mist, and now the rest you can say is history. Of the 20 that came, 12 Junins from Mist came with Gato this morning. Zabuza and Haku had stayed wanting revenge for the demon brothers who were killed by the Mist and also to help kill the little shithead. When Kakashi saw everything, he had Sasuke and Sakura watching over Tazuna and his family behind them on the bridge. Not taking the chance of an ambush at their home, he had brought them. Kakashi took 4, as did Zabuza, and Haku took 5 together, and Naruto got the last 3. Oh, did I forget to mention the mercs who were all looking on wanting to enter the fight also. Flashback end. Naruto calmed his emotions and started doing one-hand signs behind his back as he reached for his sword with the other hand, and a Mist Junin with red hair said, "Oh, you want to see how well you can fight all 3? His words were cut off as his head was suddenly sent flying across the ground. His 2 companions jumped away from him because a clone of Naruto was standing behind him with a sword clicking as it was resheathed. Naruto smirked as the 2 Junins used the hidden mist jutsu and covered the entire area around the bridge. Naruto and Zabuza both thought idiots as they both screamed from inside the mist. 8 points: liver, lungs, spine, jugular vein, carotid artery, brain, kidneys and heart. Which one should I go for? Suddenly the sound of screams and metal against metal was heard and nobody was sure who was doing what. Sakura wanted to faint. Sasuke wanted to know what was happening, but with the mist and his Sharingan he only saw the hidden mist jutsu. Kakashi's sweat drops as he dodges a Kuniya ask. Zabuza, did you really teach him silent killing? Through the mist. Zabuza, who grunted from his attack, said, yeah, I taught the little shit to well. He's the only person who can beat me in it. Feels like he is evening the numbers though. His voice coming from everywhere. The mist Junin stopped and got back to back when they heard this and had one thought going through their head. Crap. And dropped the mist just you they had up. The sight that greeted them was something they had not expected to see. When Sakura saw it, she threw up and Sasuke became even more pissed. Tazuna fainted. Tsunami looked green and Inari was shocked. Zabuza was standing with his sword in the chest of one of the ninja he was fighting with two headless bodies on the ground beside him. A dome of ice mirrors was slowly falling as Haku stepped out and two men were on the ground at her feet. Kakashi had stabbed a Kuniya in the neck of one of his enemies and was holding off another as the last two were standing back to back prepared for an attack. Naruto, who was standing behind Gato, said, "Aw man, you just ruined my fun." As Gato's eyes got big realizing the voice came from behind him and all of his merc were dead. Each with a different point, Naruto and Zabuza called out. Gato started to scream and run away, but Naruto picked him up and said, Kakashi, here's a blast from the past for you. And formed a Rasengan in his hand in less than a second and slammed it into Gato's back, propelling him forward toward the mist Junin, screaming before he died. Kakashi's eyes got big as a silver dollar. He was not sure if Naruto could use it yet, but knew Jiraiya would teach it to him sooner or later. When Naruto showed it in the Hokage office, Kakashi was passed out. Naruto looked at the 5 remaining mist Junin. Haku and Zabuza had already killed Tier 5 and the one Naruto killed. The 3 remaining ones Kakashi had been fighting looked tired and beat up, but not as bad as Kakashi. Naruto looked at them and said, so, do you still want to fight or do want to run back to the Mizukage and tell him of your failure? A black-haired one that was going to fight Naruto charged at Naruto only to have a Senbon land in his neck, knocking him out. Sasuke finally screamed, why can't I copy that jutsu? I demand you tell me how to do it and why I could not copy it. Everyone ignored him and Kakashi looked at the last 4 and said, it looks like we are in a stalemate. Your choice. The Naruto that was standing behind his last remaining enemy turned into a puddle of water and Naruto started to walk toward the rest of the group. The mist Junin got in a triangle back to back and said, we have orders not to return without both Zabuza head and the blonde. He made the hidden mist a laughing stock of the great nations. Naruto, who laughed at this, turned cold, narrowing his eyes and said, all I did was stop your village from making slaves of a village full of innocent people. I did not even harm one of your ninja but showed everyone they are perverts. You should call yourself lucky I did not do what I did to Iwa then. You know me as blonde, which flatters me. Iwa knows me as the second flash of death. I killed 40 of their ninja in 2 minutes, a little over a month after what I did to you for trying to get revenge for what my father did to them. They tried poisoning my family while we were as Rain country. I am immune to all poisons, but I detected it along with the rest of my family. When they came to get rid of our bodies, they learned one lesson quick. Leave the Kazama family alone. I am the second person in history to ever get a flea on sight order and I am only 13 years old. My father was the first. Tell you Cage to learn from this or next time I won't hold my friend here back from killing you all. As the heir to the Kazama family, I give Zabuza and Haku the protection of the Kazama clan. Now get out of my sight. As his eyes turned red. A voice in the middle of the group said, before I get pissed. And everyone was shocked because another water clone had appeared right in the middle of the 3 ninja. The 3 Junin were actually scared and quickly jumped off the bridge and started running on the water below away from the bridge. Naruto sighed and released the water clone and Kakashi looked at him and said, was that true what you said about Iwa? Naruto said, yes. We were on the border of rain and wind. I was getting ready to see my fiancé in wind and somehow they got word about me and my family being together. They decided to take us all out in one strike. They tried to poison our food, but with 3 of the best medics in the world, me who is immune like I said, and Erozan, and we all detected it. Sasuke came over and tried to punch Naruto. Keyword tried. Naruto ducked at the last second, grabbed Sasuke's arm, pulled it behind his back and tripped him, making his face smack the bridge. Naruto said, why did you try and attack me, Tem? Sasuke was even more pissed but could not get up to fight because Naruto had sat on his back and keeping him from making hand signs. Sasuke said, "Answer my question. Why could I not copy that jutsu you used? I need it too." Naruto said, "Kill Itachi. I know all about your brother and what he did. You're giving me a headache. Now sleep tight, Tem." And hit a pressure point on his neck, knocking him out. As he stood up, Sakura came over screaming at Naruto for hurting Sasuke, and Haku got pissed and hit her with a Senbon needle as well. Naruto sighed and said, "Thank you, Haku." Zabuza walked over with Kakashi and asked, "Do you mean what you said about us having your protection?" Naruto chuckled and said, "Yeah. I was going to wait until you came to Konoha to tell you though, but the little dipshit pissed me off." Looking at Gato's body, Naruto looked around and said, "Kakashi, you don't happen to have an up-to-date bingo book, do you?" Kakashi's eyes got big and pulled it out and said, "As a matter of fact, I do." Naruto took it and created 25 cage bunshin and had them go out through the mist ninja and the merc. Kakashi asked, "What do you think your fiancés will do about having a new girl in your life?" Pervertedly while looking at Haku. Naruto said, "Really, I don't even think about it. I admit Haku is beautiful, but she's." Haku said, "I am bi." Naruto is supportive of that, but he already has made a deal with his 3 fiancés and I doubt he would want another. Naruto was thinking, "Actually, I do like you and would make you a 4th, but I just don't want to have you and Anko team up against me Aegean. Also Tamari and Kurenai don't like competition." A clone came over after about 10 minutes of cleaning up the mess of bodies and finding any bounties and said, "We got about 15 C-class total. The rest don't have any we know of. I need a sealing scroll." Naruto pulled one out and handed it to the clone, who went to the others. The next day the bridge was finished and the group of 6 headed toward Konoha. Although it was more like a group of 10 because 4 clones carried Sasuke and his harpy who was knocked out Aegean. Zabuza walks up toward Naruto and asked, "How exactly did you take all of them out so quick back there? I know you're good but not that good." Naruto said, "Kajbunchins. I created 10 of them when the idiots covered the bridge and had my mist clone fight the 2 mist nins I had left. Since they could not see in the fog, the mercs went down quick. You're not the only one of the 7 left, Zabuza." Kakashi, who was walking just a little behind them, narrowed his eyes and listened to the talk. Naruto said, "Kisame is also still alive and will be coming to Konoha soon. Him and his partner Itachi have orders to kidnap me to take the Kyuubi." Zabuza said, "But didn't you already absorb the Kyuubi?" Naruto said, "Yes, but we are keeping it a secret so we can spring a trap for the guys who want to destroy all the hidden villages with the power of the demons. Kisame is one of that group." Kakashi's eyes widened when he heard that and wondered how Naruto knew this, and Naruto said, "I know you heard Kakashi, so join our conversation. The only 2 I don't want hearing are knocked out right now." Kakashi said, "Why don't you want them to know, Naruto?" Naruto sighed and walked over, quick drawed his sword and sliced a tree off to make a stump and sat down and looked at everyone and said, "Sakura will do anything for Sasuke." The tree climbing exercise showed that more than anything. After she done it, she watched him the entire time, never even tried to do any training after that. "Answer me this, Kakashi. What is Sasuke besides an Uchiha?" Kakashi looked at Naruto and said, "I don't." Naruto interrupted him, closed his eyes and said, "An Avenger. He will betray anyone to get the power to kill his brother. Even the Leaf Village. Do you know how to get the final level of the Sharingan like Itachi, Kakashi?" Kakashi narrowed his eyes and Naruto said, "You must feel sorrow for killing your best friend. That is what Sasuke will do to kill his brother." Kakashi said, "But Sasuke won't do that." Naruto said, "And that's why you won't remember." Opening his eyes and Kakashi sees his eyes and faints. His eyes were no longer blue. They were red but had all different patterns of commas and lines and diamonds, as well as his veins on the side of them popped out. Naruto sighs, closing his eyes and changing them back to normal. He then went through some hand seals and said, "Memory implant jutsu," and taps Kakashi on the head. Zabuza said, "What did you do that for, Naruto, and what was that thing with your eyes?" Naruto said, "I did that so Kakashi won't remember what I said on the bridge or on the way here. Konoha does not need to know about me being as strong as I am right now because we have spies in the village because we are going to be attacked during the Chunin exams soon. He also has blind faith in the Uchiha because of his dead teammate that gave him that eye. I learned that jutsu from a Yamenko before and implanted a fake memory that I put in both the Harpy and the Tem over there already. As for the eye, it's a bloodline I created. You know how I told you about how I have Kyuubi. Since I have absorbed him all, I know how to create my own bloodline with it and gave myself a way to fight the Sharingan as well as a few other tricks. I call it the Trinagan. Let's go. And created a couple of Kajbunshians to take Kakashi body as well. They continued on their way after that. When the gates of Konoha appeared, a team of ABNU appeared and was about to start something when Naruto said, "You will not harm anyone under the protection of the Kazama clan." An ABNU in a sheep's mask asked, "Explain why, since you are the only person not out right now." Naruto said, "Kakashi used his Sharingan to long training the Uchiha. Sakura thought the Uchiha died and passed out. Sasuke tried a jutsu Kakashi showed him and has chakra exhaustion, and these two are under my protection and we would like to see the Hokage." The Hokage appeared then with Naruto in a swirl of flames and leaves and said, "Settle down. I have already talked to Naruto and they are free to enter." The Naruto talking to the ABNU went up in a puff of smoke. Zabuza chuckled and Haku giggled at the reactions the ABNU had. The Hokage said, "Follow me," and led them to the tower. Zabuza and Haku, after explaining about themselves and with help from Naruto and Jiraiya, were made members of Konoha. Zabuza as a special Junin and Haku as a Chunin. She was going to start work at the hospital. They were both put under probation for 90 days with only half pay and a curfew with limited access to the village, but they agreed. They were given a place in the village and Team 7 was put in the hospital except for Naruto, who appeared in his room and passed out within minutes. Naruto was going to look for his fiancés, but Team 8 was on a mission to a village north of Konoha and Anko was with an ABNU that were looking at a supposed increase in missing nins near the border to Suna. Naruto team was given the rest of the week off because in 10 days the Chunin exams start. Zabuza and Haku both got a 2-bedroom apartment on the west side of town. Hiati and Zabuza both became quick friends because of their love for Kenjutsu. Haku was given the same schedule as Shizune and was apprenticing under her even more to learn what Tsunade had not taught her. Jiraiya had to leave town to deliver the next volume of his book to his publishing company. That's his official excuse. The real reason is he asked Tsunade to marry him and ran before she realized what he said. Shizune, when not training Haku and working at the hospital, has been seen with a Sertian Chunin Academy instructor. Tsunade had, after figuring out what he had said, tried to find the pervert, but he was done gone. The third was trying to make her his successor, but she kept saying no. Rin has been spending time at her sister's house. Naruto was having a good day. It had been 5 days since him and his team got back. He has been doing some pranks on his team every day this week. He got up and walked toward the hospital to see his teammates. He snickered at the reaction he got when he brought them into the hospital. Flashback. Day 1. Naruto walked into the hospital with a passed out Sakura, Sasuke, and Kakashi. A nurse ran up and asked, "What did you do to them, boy?" Naruto smiled and said, "Kakashi-sensei passed out from showing Sasuke how to use his Sharingan." Sakura passed out when Sasuke asked her to help him restore his clan, and Sasuke passed out when he was practicing a jutsu Kakashi showed him. Personally, I think it was funny when Sasuke asked Sakura to get something to help her get pregnant faster. If you could, you might want to go ahead and give it to her. And he dropped all three in the floor of the hospital and left with a smirk. End flashback. Flashback day 2. The next day when he walked into the hospital, he henged into a doctor he hated from his childhood and walked up to the nurse's desk and said, "Follow me," and started walking toward his teammate's room. The nurse right behind him. When he walked in, Kakashi was still passed out, but Sakura was awake. Sasuke was asleep. He had woke up earlier but did not want to deal with Sakura. The doctor walked up and said, "Sakura, your teammate when he dropped you off yesterday said something and I was wondering if you could confirm it. Did Sasuke ask you to help him restore his clan?" Sakura blinked, trying to get the fog out of her brain, and she remembered a memory of that but did not know if it was true, and she said, "Yeah, I remember that, but I thought it was a dream." The doctor nodded and walked to her chart and wrote in it and said, "Please give this to her," showing the nurse the orders. He learned medical jargon from Tsunade and Shizune in previous lives. The nurse looked at it and paled and said, "Are you sure, sir? I mean, want that." The doctor cut her off and said, "That's the whole point. While you're at it, give this to the Uchiha also. Don't want to upset him, do we?" Writing in Sasuke chart and showing the nurse. The nurse paled Aegean and was about to say something when a civilian council member walked in and Naruto had to hide a smirk. The council member started to say something when the nurse said, "Thank goodness, maybe you can talk some sense into the doctor here." The council member looked at her and said, "What are you getting at, woman?" The nurse said, "The Uchiha asked his teammate to help him restore his clan while on the last mission, and the doctor here is wanting to give them fertilization drugs." The council member got a look on his face like he won the lotto and said, "Well, you heard him, get to it. I will inform the rest of the council," and ran out of the room. Naruto looked at the nurse and said, "Is that any way to act toward your superiors?" as he walked out the room and walked down the hall into an empty room, closing the door. Dropping the henge, he left the hospital by the window. End flashback. Flashback day 3. This time Naruto hanged into another doctor he hated and walked up to the nurse's desk. The nurse from the previous day had called in sick today, so he said, "I need to check on the Uchiha and I need one of you to come with me." A old woman who could not properly see anything said, "I will help you, doctor," and followed him toward the room. Naruto stopped at the supply cabinet and got a bottle of medicine and walked into the room and asked, "How are you both feeling today?" Kakashi was asleep with his Ika book over his face. Sakura, who was still disoriented from some pain medicine, said, "A little lightheaded." The doctor picked up her chart and walked over to her and ran a basic scan on her and looked at her IV and smirked and wrote some more stuff in her chart and said, "Nurse, please make sure she gets these medicines added to her to help with the lightheadedness and to get ready faster." And handed it to the nurse, who looked at it through her glasses and then picked them up and looked before saying, "Right away, sir," and left the room to ask someone what it said. Once she was gone, he went to the medical cabinet in the room and got a needle and drew up some of the medicine he grabbed earlier and walked over to Sasuke and injected it into his IV. Sakura looked at him and asked, "What is that for?" The doctor said, "It's to help him with the pain. The previous doctor left a note telling me he had muscle spasms last night," and walked out the room thinking, actually that shot is more than enough to make him sterile. "I don't care what they give him now." And he walked out the hospital. End flashback. Flashback day 4. Naruto walked into the hospital room as himself, except he had a long white robe like his father's on, but his hands were covered. He walked over and handed Kakashi the newest edition of Ika and said, "Perks of knowing the publisher." And walked over to Sasuke and said, "So bastard, what they feeding you?" And he dropped the fork off the table beside his bed. Sasuke was brooding and Naruto bent down to pick up the fork and slapped a tag under Sasuke's bed as he was standing up and said, "What, no answer?" and waited a few minutes. Sasuke just HMPED and looked out the window. Naruto sighed and walked toward Sakura and said, "How you feeling?" Sakura was starting to look frazzled and she said, "Leave. Now." Naruto sighed and said, "So much for teamwork," and walked out the room. He smirked as he walked by the nurse's station and the emergency button for his teammates were going off. The nurses ran down to see what was going on and saw Sasuke having muscle convulsions, and he heard a doctor say, "Restrain him so he can't hurt himself." End flashback. And now we have today. When Naruto walked into the room his teammates were in, he had to hold his hand over his mouth at the sight that he saw. Kakashi was passed out from a blood loss and his mask was red now and his book was on the floor. Sasuke was chained to the bedrails with hospital restraints, and apparently the drugs he prescribed for Sakura had finally taken effect, as she was currently giving the boy one hell of a rodeo, though she did have the descent to have herself covered with a sheet. A nurse walked in that Naruto did recognize as the nurse the council member talked to, and he asked her, "What did you give her?" The nurse was shocked at the sight and said, "The doctors order an IV of hormone modifiers to help someone get pregnant faster. It appears they also gave the Uchiha the male enhancement drugs also. They have been going at this for a while now." Naruto blinked and asked, "What do you mean?" innocently. The nurse said, "According to the nurse on the last shift, the girl had started around 2 in the morning. The Uchiha woke for only a few moments before passing out, and she has been going off and on ever since then. In fact, I don't think she has stopped to sleep yet. We had to start giving her IV solutions of nutrients to keep her from dying." Naruto looked at her and said, Then why don't you stop the hormone IV or get her off of him? The nurse said. Can't. We were given strict orders from the council. Someone told them the Uchiha selected his first girl and they want to start the clan resurrection. In fact, I should not be telling you all of this, but the council is spreading the word already about it. Sakura mother could not be happier. Naruto said. Then why don't you give them privacy and remove Kakashi-sensei? The nurse said. He was ordered to stay for their protection until they stop. Naruto snorted and said. Thanks, I will give them some privacy. And he turned and walked out the room only to stop at the front desk as Shizune said. Why do I think you had something to do with what's happening in your teammate's room? Naruto smiled a foxy smile and said. Don't know what you're talking about, Nichan, but you know the saying make love not war. And ran out of the hospital to avoid the clipboard that impaled into the wall where he was. He was in a good mood until he suddenly felt a huge amount of ki and knew only one person besides himself who could produce that much. He flamed Shushin to where he was feeling it, and sure enough there was Gaara standing looking at the sound Genins, and Gaara said, say that Aegean. Duso said. You heard us, kill the Kazama kid or we will kill your sister. Naruto hanged into an ABNU and jumped to the ground and said, look here Genins. You are here for the Chunin exams and are not allowed to fight until your matches or we will have to have you leave. Kin said. Fine, we were just leaving, it's nice to see you Aegean Tamari. Gaara was about to kill them when he saw a Rasengan just barely hidden under the cloaked hand of the ABNU. He knew there were only 3 people who could do that jutsu. He watched them leave and once they were gone Naruto dropped his henge and said, are you alright? Looking at the 3. Tamari sighed and said, yes. We just arrived and were on our way to our hotel room when they stopped us. Naruto said, forget the hotel room, you are all staying at my place. As 2 more of him appeared and grabbed Gaara and Konkuro's shoulder and they both flammed Shushin away and Naruto picked Tamari up bridal style and left in one also. When they got to his home Tsunade was reading a scroll and looked up and smiled before going back to the scroll she was reading. Naruto sighed and said, I wish I could kill that bastard right now. Tsunade stopped reading and said, what's wrong? Tamari said, we were heading toward our hotel room when 3 sound nins confronted us and said we either kill Naruto-kun or they will kill me. Tsunade clenched her fist and she looked at Naruto and said, are you ready? Naruto snorted and said, yeep. They won't know what hit them and I already have my teammates preoccupied. Tsunade said, so that was you that did that? Naruto smiled a foxy grin and said, yeep, and the best part is the bastard can't get her pregnant. The 3 sand genins looked at each other and said, what are you both talking about? Konkuro asked. Naruto said, I hanged into different doctors I hated from my childhood and had them fill out hormone drugs to make Sakura, my pink-haired teammate, so horny she has to get it out of her system, and she is currently raping my other teammate who was her crush. I gave him also the same drugs, but I also gave him something to make him permanently sterile. On the way back from our previous mission I implanted a memory in both of them in my sensei's head to where they all heard Sasuke ask Sakura to restore his clan with him so they think it was real. When Sakura and Sasuke get it out of their system they will be out for a week, and guess when that is going to be? Gaara smiled an evil smile and said, during the Chunin exams. Tsunade did some hand seals and her looks changed and said, you're so mean Naruto Baka. As her appearance of Sakura. Jiraiya, who was at the stairs, did some signs also and said, she's right Dobi, as he appeared to be Sasuke. Naruto smiled and said, those may look like normal henges, but the only way they will come down is if they run out of chakra. I modified the henge Granny uses to make her look younger even though she looks nice without it dodges a fist, and I also have an area in the forest set up with seals where once I activate it a barrier appears and you can't shushin out or dig out or jump over. I set it up to trap Orochimaru himself. Gaara asked, so where's the party? Naruto said, right in the middle of our gates 1 mile in. Just shushin to my location and hide if you want to have some fun. I have markers all over the battlefield and no summons will be able to come in over the size of a small summon. No bosses because there is no room. If he tries to summon Manda he will smack the barrier and hurt himself and dispel Manda, who will probably kill Orochimaru if he escapes. I just ask you to watch everyone, Gaara. You and me both can recover from anything he throws at us, the rest can't. Gaara nodded and said, just save me some fun. Naruto nodded and said, "Of course, just don't forget to take out Kabuto afterwards." Kankuro sat his puppet on the ground and said, "Crow is ready for him." Tamari started to polish her fan and let out an evil chakra as a dark aurora appeared around her and everyone's sweat dropped and stepped back and Gaara said, "Shukaku's scarred right now." The next few days blew by quickly. All the teams started to prepare and finally the day of the exams arrived. Kakashi along with Sasuke and Sakura were currently in a safe house in the Hokage Mountain with 25 of the most trusted ABNU watching over them. Sasuke and Sakura were in a medical induced coma. Of course Sakura would not be walking right for a few days anyways. Shizune's sweat dropped as she did a medical jutsu on her and Sasuke. Kakashi said, "Why are we doing this, Aegean?" Shizune said, "Orochimaru has infiltrated the exams but we don't know who he is disqueezed as so Tsunade and Jiraiya are also disqueezed and you are here to protect your other two students in case he finds out." Kakashi sighs and reads his book. Note, until I say otherwise Sasuke is actually Jiraiya and Sakura is Tsunade. Meanwhile across the village Team 7 walked into the academy and made it to the second floor and Sasuke looks at everyone and remembers the plan and said, "Drop the genjutsu, we are only on the second floor," and starts walking through the crowd. Murmurs could be heard and a genin tried to punch him but Sasuke just stepped back as Rock Lee intercepted the punch. A few minutes later Rock Lee said, "I challenge you Sasuke Uchiha to a fight." Sasuke said, "No," and turned and kept on walking. They walked into the room only for a scream of, "Sasuke-kun," to pierce their ears. Ino grabbed onto Sasuke who grabs her and her at the exact moment she was on him. Sakura became enraged and Sasuke said, "Remember Sakura, I have to have more than one winch since I already slept with you." Giving one of his perverted grins as well as an evil grin at the same time making Tsunade realize he is making the girl get over her crush with the bastard. Naruto sweat drops as Ino punches Sasuke and runs to her team crying. Right into the arms of Choji who is comforting her. Team 8 walks over and Kiba said, "So cuz, we finally going to do this thing." Naruto said, "Yeet, but let's wait until we have a crowd in the finals or semi-finals to show our skills so that way we are at our best." Kiba said, "Deal." Shino looked at Sakura and Sasuke and said, "Naruto, who are your?" Naruto looked dead into Shino's eyes and said, "My teammates for the exams, you know how many enemies we have here so we don't want to release any important info." Shino nodded as a silver hair guy with glasses walked over and said, "You're right Kazama-kun. That is some good advice. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Kabuto and I would like to help you all out with the test." Shikamaru said, "Troublesome, what do you mean?" Kabuto said, "I have info on everyone here and if you want I could tell you so that you can have an easier time." Neji walked over and said, "What do you have on him?" Pointing toward Naruto. Kabuto shuffled his cards and said, "Well, let's see. Holy shit. This can't be right." Everyone looked at him and Lee said, "What?" Kabuto said, "Naruto Uzumaki Kazama, aka Blonde, aka the second flash of death, aka the Music Man." Naruto interrupted him and said, "I know Mist gave me Blonde and Iwa gave me the second flash of death but who gave me Music Man?" Kabuto looked at his card and said, "Actually that comes from the village in Rain Country you saved. You also just got the new name Butcher of Wave." Kiba asked, "What's with all the name cuz?" Kabuto said, "The name he got from Mist is when he defeated 1200 Mist Nin with one jutsu. He got the second flash of death from Iwa when he killed 25. Naruto interrupted and said, 40. Kabuto looked at him and said, 40 of Their Ninja while using his father's signature move which also got him listed in the bingo book with something only his father had, a flea on side order. He got the Music Man because the music he used when he defeated the 1200 Mist Nins ADN he got the Butcher of Wave from Mist when he killed 200 Merc and 10 Junins. Naruto said, I only killed 1 Junin, the 200 Mercs and Their boss Gato and we let 3 Junins leave, Zabuza, Haku and Kakashi got the others. What else do you have on me? Everyone was looking at him like he was crazy and Ino asked, did you really kill all those people Naruto? Naruto said, well you can ask the Iwa and Mist Nins that are running out the windows if it's true. Everyone turned to the sound of broken glass as 6 figures jumped out the window running. Everyone's sweat dropped and Ibiki appeared and said, What did you do this time, Kazama? Naruto pulled out his N-pod and said, this. And hit play, and the sound of a car tires screech and glass breaking and Stone Cold's music started to play. Don't own the music or person known as Stone Cold. They are owned by someone else. As he walked to the front of the class with his black cloak on and his sword on his side. Ibuki's sweat dropped and thought, why me? As Naruto started walking with the music, most of the people were looking at him like he was crazy. A blonde girl started walking over with a fan on her back, and Kiba looked at her and said, hey baby, how about you and me go to the dog pound? The girl looked at him and said, sorry, I am taken. Kiba said, show me who the loser is and I will make him beg for mercy. Suddenly a pair of arms surrounded the girl and a head rested on her shoulder, and the head said, say something about making me beg cuz. Kiba looked at Naruto and said, you got to be shitting me. Naruto snorted and said, nope, I told you my third fiancé was from another village. I had it arranged since I was 5, I think. Kiba said, why do you have to get all the good-looking women? First you got Kurenai Sensei, then you got that crazy snake woman Anko or whatever you call her. When Kiba said snake woman, a genin from grass narrowed his eyes and listened in. Naruto said, well, what can I say? I got lucky to have found 3 very beautiful and loving wives. Ibuki cleared his throat and said, I hate to interrupt this little party you are having, but find your damn seat so we can take the test. Naruto sighed and kissed the neck of Temari as he let her go and took his seat, which was next to Hinata. Ibuki said, finally, the test is simple. You got 10 points. You get caught cheating, you lose 2 points every time you cheat. You get the wrong answer, you get points taken away. If you run out of point, you and your team fail. You have a test in front of you with 9 questions. The 10th question will be asked after 45 minutes. Good luck and begin. Naruto looked at the test and, having taken it so many times, wrote the answer in 2 minutes, making several eyebrows go up. He then pulled out a scroll and bit his thumb and smeared some blood on the scroll, and out popped 4 bottles of sake. He started to do some hand signs and said, ice style, ice party style, and the 4 bottles got frost on them, and one of the Chunin instructors that was watching the test slapped her forehead and muttered, idiot. Naruto grabbed 2 bottles and tossed them behind them in opposite directions without looking, only for Sasuke and Sakura to each grab them. Naruto then bit his thumb again and started to do some hand signs before slamming his hand on the table and said, Kuchio's no jutsu, summoning technique, and an orange frog appeared on his desk. The frog blinked and said, you bro, what's up? Naruto pulled out a deck of cards and opened the sake and said, $10,000 entry fee, you in or out Gamakachi. Gamakachi reached in his pouch and said, deal fox, as he sat his money on the table. Everyone was sweat dropping, and Ibuki said, you do realize there is an important test going on, right? Naruto said, yeah, but I am already done and already found the pigeons. You want in? I will cut you a deal. If I can beat you in 5 games out of 7 at 5 card draw, after I make Chunin, you let me join the interrogation division when you have someone you can't crack. If I lose, you can have the rest of my winning, but if my friend here wins, I will buy you that. Throwing a book to Ibuki that has a bookmark in it. Ibuki opens the book and said, deal the cards. Everyone's sweat drops, and a Chunin said, Ibuki sir, don't forget the test. Ibuki looked at him and said, the way the kid laid it out, I win no matter what, and I have wanted this for a while. Showing the book to the Chunin who passed out. Another Chunin asked, what is it, sir? Ibuki looked at the Chunin and recognized him from his interrogation unit and said, remember that portable interrogation office we read about in the last issue of the bingo book? The Chunin nodded, and Ibuki said, that coat that has all the interrogation's equipment is what he is offering me. If he makes Chunin, I will let him join. Don't forget who his other fiancé is. Everyone in the room was listening, and the Chunin must not have heard Kiba because he said, who was it, Aegean sir? Naruto did some hand signs and shot out some snakes from his sleeves that wrapped around the Chunin and said, do you know now? Ibuki looked at Naruto and said, how do you have a snake contract, Naruto? Gamakachi said, Manda sucks at poker. Bro here had a contest 2 years ago and wound up getting about 20 summoning contracts out of it. Ibuki asked, why would the summons play poker with you, kid? Naruto said, they can't beat me at drinking, and I offered them 2 taels worth of my chakra to do whatever they wanted if they could beat me. I never lose at poker. Besides Manda's I beat him not only at drinking, but poker, and fighting. I made him change the deal he has with Orochimaru. Now if the Hebatem wants to summon Manda he has to pay 3 times the normal sacrifices. With a smile on his face. The Rain Nin who had narrowed his eyes a moment ago was sending huge amounts of killer intent at Naruto who said, "Man, do you feel that? It feels like a bug bite." All the genins in a row diagonal from Naruto to the Rain Nin passed out from the KI. Ibiki and Naruto started to play cards and the time flew by with Naruto unsealing another bottle of sake for Ibiki to drink. The rest of the teams started to work on their test trying to ignore the spectacle they were watching. Soon the 45 minutes were up and Ibiki looked up from his cards and said, "Okay, time for the last question. You have to decide if you take it or not. If you take it and miss you will never become Shunin. If you decide to not take it get up and leave now." He then laid 2 cards down and drew 2 more and Naruto drew 3, Gamakachi drew 1 and several people got up and started to leave. All the genins that passed out from the key earlier had done left so now there was only 16 teams left. Naruto looked at Ibiki and said, "So has anyone else popped up with those weak as curse seals of Orochimaru's?" Ibiki said, "No, I still can't believe you figured out how to get rid of them." Naruto snorted as he shuffled the cards in his hand and said, "If that's all the skill he has then it's no wonder my dad was named Yondaime Hokage instead of him." Ibiki said, "So did you find out anything else about him yet?" Ignoring everyone listening in. Naruto said, "I got word that after he left Akatsuki he went and was planning on starting his own village somewhere. I bet he goes and being the idiot he is makes it where whatever he names the village is what his attacks will be based off of like the village of shit where they crap on the ground and pick it up and throw it at you or the village of M&S where they walk around with Vaseline or something like that. I swear the way my grandfather Jiraiya and grandmother Tsunade talk about him with Anko I don't see how he is anything other than a wimp." Smirking to himself as he feels 9 different ki. Naruto got an evil grin and said, "I bet he even gets himself a personal medic that can put the Vaseline on for him since his hands are so rough from playing with himself. I wonder if the bastard has figured out how to do that body switch jutsu the Hokage told me about. I bet he needs a new body from getting his other ones used up from spending so much time playing with any idiot who follows him. Picture this. Yes Orochimaru-sama. You hands are nice and oily from playing with the snakes. Do you need me to put your experiments away for you or did you find out a way to make the pump to work for you?" Ibiki along with most of the class could not take it any longer and started bursting out laughing and Ibiki said between laughs, "What would you do if he ever heard you say that?" Naruto smirked and said, "Please, that wimp is too afraid to fight me. I bet if he ever fought me I would have him on his knees begging for me to kill him. I would bitch slap him and take that sword of his whatever it's called a scudder or something like that and used Kakashi Sensei's 1000 years of death on him but he might enjoy that. Well I guess I will have to wait and see. He won't come near me anyways because he thinks he can master all the jutsu in the world. Hell even if he had Sasuke Sharingan up there he could never master them all. Hell, I would even make a bet for him. If he could beat me in a one-on-one fight I would teach him Rasengan. Oh well. Time to finish our hands." Naruto held up his hand and started to count down from 5.4, 0.3, 0.2, 0.1. And the glass to the window shattered and a black ball of cloth exploded and Anko said, "Okay Gaki, I am your next." Naruto interrupted her and said, "Hold on a minute Sarahime. So Ibiki, what are you going to do?" Anko sweat dropped and Ibiki said, "I am all in." Gamakachi had just about as much as Ibiki and pushed his in as well and Naruto pushed in his and said, "Call." They all showed their cards. Naruto won with a royal flush. Gamakachi had a straight and Ibiki had 4 of a kind. Naruto smiled and said, "Well Ibiki, even thought I won here is that coat I promised." "Okay Sarahime, you can go now." And he dodged a kunia which hit his seat from Anko. Gamakachi grabbed his sake bottle and left in a puff of smoke. Anko looked at him ready to kill and said, "Everyone to training area 44 now. If you're not there in 10 minutes you fail and I will kill you." And left in a swirl of leaves. Naruto sighed and said, "What's her problem?" And left in a swirl of flames. Shocking many. Ibiki was a kid in a candy store looking at his new coat. I know that this chapter will explain a few things but leave a lot of unanswered questions. I sat it up for a reason. I know you will understand when I update the next chapter, so I hope you like it. P.S. For all those Sasuke haters out there, your ultimate revenge for him will happen in the next chapter or two. I have been setting it up and I just have to bring in the main actors. Ha ha ha. When Naruto appeared at the entrance to the Forest of Death, he smiled and Anko looked at him and she said, "So when were you going to tell me about having the snake contract?" Naruto said, "I guess it slipped my mind. I also have the cat, dog, boar, hawk, eagle, toad, slug, spider, scorpion, and a few others, but you never know when you might need one." Anko looked at Naruto like he was crazy and thought, well, at least he is ready for anything, and walked over and kissed him. Just then several others started arriving. Ino was yelling at Sakura for underage drinking and it could be bad for her if she was pregnant. Naruto sighed and said, "Hey Ino. Chill. It's not like they were drugged with medicine to make them get pregnant faster. That would be cruel." Ino looked at him and said, "What are you doing defending them? I thought you hated them." Naruto said, "The emo I can't stand, but Sakura has calmed down now that she got laid. If you notice, she has not bitched back at you." Ino looked at Sakura and sighed and walked over to her teammates. Sakura walked over and whispered, "Little girl tried to enter my mind, but I forced all the alcohol into it when she entered, making her sick. She left quickly after that. Unfortunately, I passed out from the alcohol, but the key woke me up." Naruto smiled and said, "Remember the plan. This is going to be fun." And he thought it almost time to pay for my deal with death. They both nodded and Anko explained to everyone what the rules were and had them get ready. Meanwhile, across town on top of the Hokage monument, Rin was sitting on a blanket on the head of the Yondaime and looked at the note Naruto gave her. "Mom. Today I want to show you how much I love you and do something special for you. Go to the Hokage monument and sit on Dad's head after 11 a.m. and take a picnic lunch and wait. It may be a few hours, but I promise you that the wait will be well rewarded." Naruto. Rin sighed and took a sip of her sake that she brought. She had just arrived and was sitting looking over the city. Naruto smirked as the signal was given and the gates were opened. Team 7 charged in through Gate 19 and the Sand Team charged through Gate 20. 10 minutes later they arrived at the spot Naruto had set up and Gaara and his siblings hid in a small tree cave Naruto used his bloodline to make. Naruto turned and Sasuke said, "Okay Dobi, so what's the plan?" as he felt someone arriving in the area. He narrowed his eyes when he could tell it was not who he was expecting, but he recognized who it was. Just then he felt the ones he was waiting for to arrive enter the area. Naruto said, "I think we should head to the tower and make an ambush there." Sakura said, "Instead of that, let's wait." She was interrupted when a huge wave of air came by and slammed into all three of them, but they used chakra to hold themselves to the ground. Just then 9 figures jumped into the clearing. Naruto smirked and did 3 hand seals and slammed his hand on the ground and said, "Sealing art, Kitsune force field." And a red bubble surrounded everything in a quarter-mile radius. Sakura said, "What's going on here?" The Rain Nin walked forward and said, "I have come for the Uchiha and also to kill your teammate little girl." Sasuke said, "I don't swing that way. The 4 eyes over there probably does though." Kabuto said, "Please let me humiliate him for you, Orochimaru-sama." A swirl of sand appeared beside Naruto and Gaara was standing there and he said, "Sorry, but your dance card is full with me." Sasuke said, "So who wants Mr. Emo?" Naruto said, "You can deal with Kabuto teammate and Sakura can work on the 3 sound genins. I will take Orochimaru." Laughter was heard and the Rain Nin reached up and pulled his face off and said, "So tell me how you knowed it was me." Naruto smirked and said, "Simple. Like any good pimp, I always know where my bitches are." Orochimaru narrowed his eyes and said, "Today you die, boy, and your grandparents can't save you." 2 set of laughters were heard and Sasuke and Sakura shimmered and were replaced by Tsunade and Jiraiya said, "We won't even have to enter the fight with you and him. He is stronger than all of us. Let's get the party going." And charged toward the 2 teammates of Kabuto. Kabuto looked at Gaara and said, "It looks like I will have to have some fun with your sister after all." Gaara smiled and said, "What do you know about me, Kabuto?" Kabuto pulled out a card and said, "I know you are the Kazecage's son and also the vessel for Shukaku, but you don't seem to be able to control it because you don't really use his power." "Why?" Gaara chuckled and looked at Naruto and said, "Is he really that much of an idiot?" Naruto, never taking his eyes off of Orochimaru, said, "Yes, but don't forget he has advanced healing like ours, so make sure you destroy his body completely, not just bones and muscles." Kabuto narrowed his eyes and said, "And how do you know that, boy?" Naruto said, "One demon knows another weasel." And he put his hand on the hilt of his sword and started walking toward Orochimaru. Orochimaru looked at Naruto and said, "Today you die," and sent out some snakes to attack Naruto, and a wall of earth came up in front of Naruto and blocked the snakes as Naruto continued to walk forward, and the wall crumbled to the ground for him to not stop. Orochimaru was surprised and started to do some hand seals and breathed out several small fireballs at Naruto, only to be intercepted like the snakes, but this time by a wall of water. Naruto made it to about 10 feet away from Orochimaru and said, "So how do you like Kyuubi?" Orochimaru looked at him and said, "What does that damn fox have to do with you using attacks without hand seals?" Naruto chuckled and said, "You misunderstand me, Hebatem. I was not referring to the fox that used to be in my stomach before I absorbed him. I was referring to my sword." Orochimaru looked down at the sword Naruto had his hand on that was still sheathed and said, "What does that little toy have to do with anything?" Naruto smirked and said, "My sword is a specialty sword I made and had the seals put on myself so no one would learn about the secrets. Want to know what it does?" Orochimaru smirked and started doing hand seals in his coat sleeves and said, "Fine, humor me." Just then a scream was heard. A few moments before, Jiraiya was attacking both of Kabuto teammates and they jumped away. One suddenly charged at Jiraiya and put his hand on Jiraiya back, only for Jiraiya hair to turn into spikes and stab the ninja hand. He jumped back and started to do hand signs when suddenly a voice behind him said, "You blew it." And he was encased in darkness. Jiraiya smirked as the puppet captured the nin and another puppet came over with swords sticking out of it, and it inkas the first puppet, and the only sound that could be heard was a scream as flesh was cut to pieces. Tsunade had punched the ground and picked up a huge slab of stone and chunked it at the three sound nins, only for one of the nins to stick up his hands and blow the stone to pieces. He smirked for a moment until a female voice said, "Kamedachi no Jutsu, cutting whirlwind technique," and it hit the stones that had been blown to smaller pieces and hurled at the three sound nins. The same sound nin tried to blast the stones Aegean, but unfortunately he had taken his eyes off of Tsunade during the attack and was on the receiving end of a huge leg drop from in the sky. It hit his head, snapping his neck and sending him face first in the ground dead. A wall of sand came up around Tsunade to block the stones that flew by where the other two sound nins had been a moment before. Kabuto looked at this and charged at Gaara and said, "You should never take your eyes off of your opponent," and tried to attack with his chakra scapels. Unfortunately, since Gaara did not have assassination attempts on his life, no one knew about his ultimate defense except for family. The sand caught Kabuto's hand and a sand clone of Gaara appeared and held Kabuto in place. Gaara sighed and said, "You are an idiot," as he watched the rest of the fights going on. The two nins who arrived with Orochimaru looked at what was going on and one said, "Should we fight them, Orochimaru-sama?" Orochimaru, who was busy looking at Naruto, said, "No. My nins can handle those old has-beens and never will be. If they can't, then they don't deserve to live. Stay put, because after I am done with this boy we will find the real Uchiha." Naruto started to laugh. His laughter was so hard all fighting stopped and Orochimaru said, "What's so funny, boy?" Naruto wiped an imaginary tear from his face and said, "You really are an idiot when it comes to sealing, aren't you? Did you forget that little jutsu I did when you first arrived? We are all trapped here until I release it. No one can enter or leave until I drop it, and it don't matter if I am dead or not. The jutsu is powered by all the plants in this forest, or as I like to call it, home." Orochimaru said, "We will see about that, boy," and went through the hand seals to summon Manda. When he hit the ground, Manda appeared and started to rise, only to hit the barrier and crack his skull. Orochimaru, who was on top of Manda, was like a pancake and said, "Hurry and leave Manda. I can't breath." Manda hissed and said, "When you summon me, Aegean Orochimaru, I will kill you," and left in a puff of smoke. Naruto charged at that moment and pulled his sword out while still covered in the smoke and sliced the ninja on the left across the neck and killing him silently before he turned, only to intercept a sword made out of bone. Naruto smirked at this, and suddenly the other nin received 7 slashes across his back and a tree root started to wrap around his body. He then quickly sheathed his sword. Orochimaru, who was panting, finally looked up and saw Naruto was gone and then heard a cry of pain behind him and turned only to pale. His next body until he got Sasuke was laying on the ground without a head, and the leader of his Sound 5 was trapped in a tree root and had what appeared to be 8 Naruto standing around him. Orochimaru stood up, narrowing his eyes, and thought, any jutsu I try won't work because he can counter them without trying thanks to that sword somehow. I could created a few mud clones, but for some reason the ground around here is not acting normal. I tried to go underground only for nothing to happen. Is it because of that barrier? Let's see if I can get some answers. And said, okay boy. I know you have skills, but this has finally piqued my interest. How are you doing this without hand seals? As he placed one hand up to his chin with his index finger running along his cheek and the other one on his belly. Naruto knew what he was fixing to do and said, simple really. Any and all jutsu I know this sword knows. It is sentient. That is not why it can do without hand seals though. That answer is simple. As long as I touch the sword it can read my mind and knows which jutsu I want to do and performs them for me. Orochimaru was surprised by this and said, but how can the sword do that? It would need chakra. Doing the one-hand seals by his belly. Naruto took a step away from the prisoner he had now and said, it does have chakra. Over the years I have added all my extra chakra into it. This sword literally has 9 taels worth of chakra. I joked around before and said it only had 1 tael's worth when people ask. No one has ever actually seen what it really can do. That is until now. And he charged at Orochimaru only to intercept the grasscutter that came out of his mouth and block its strike. Orochimaru jumped back and grabbed his sword and said, my boy. You surprise me. Any normal blade would have been destroyed by grasscutter like that. Naruto, who put his blade pointing at the ground, smirked and started channeling chakra around the blade. 1 ring of energy, then another, and so on until 9 rings of energy were going around the sword's blade, and Naruto said, roar for me Kyuubi, and he charged Orochimaru. Gaara could not believe what his opponent just did. He looked at Kabuto and said, do you think I am afraid of blood or something? Kabuto was treating the wound on his hand where he stabbed himself trying to get it free from Gaara's sand. Kabuto said, no, I was trying to get free. Wrong choice of words, and Gaara said, fly free little bird. And his sand wrapped around Kabuto and hurled him up into the air only for him to bounce off the barrier walls and fall back toward the ground. He would have had a soft landing if Tsunade had not ran underneath him and jumped up and put a fist in his back and sent him back up into the air toward the barrier. After rebounding a second time off the barrier, he was breathing heavy only to feel his arms control go haywire, and he punches himself in the nuts. He groans as he covers them with his other hand only for it to grab him and squeezed painfully. He cries out and the sound of laughter was heard. He looks up and sees the boy in makeup with what looks like chakra strings running into his arms. He realizes what is happening and channels all his chakra as he can to cut the string. He starts panting and slowly starts to stand up only to receive a very painful hemorrhoid check with a female voice said, Tamari 10,000 years of death. As her fan went up his. He was sent flying toward Tsunade, who drawed back and punched him toward Jiraiya, who powered a Rasengan and slammed it into Kabuto back to launch him back toward Gaara, who had a grin that would make Ibiki proud. Gaara had his sand turn into a javelin that went through Kabuto's skull down his neck and back to come out his, and be held in place. Jiraiya did a Kaden Gokaku no Jutsu, fire release, great fireball technique, and set Kabuto body on fire. Jiraiya asked, how do you like your meat? Well done or burnt? Everyone said, burnt. Tamari looked around and saw the guy Naruto had trapped in tree roots and Orochimaru and Naruto facing each other preparing to attack, and asked, what happened to the last 3? After my attack I did not get to see what happened because I was distracted by the summon smoke. Jiraiya said, after your brother mutilated the one guy with his puppets, I used the Doden Yomi Numa Earth Release Swamp of the Underworld and sucked him of all his chakra and then let it consume him. The other 2 I don't know. As he looked over at Naruto and saw him moving his lips but could not hear what he was saying. Tsunade, who was also looking, said, when your brother incas me in the sand to protect me, I used the earth style headhunter jutsu and dug under them. They were close together, so when I broke the ground I was able to pull them both down. The guy unfortunately hit that metal device on his arm as he went down and caused both him and his teammate to die from the soundwave blowing their eardrums away. Luckily I was underground so the sound did not get me. What the hell? As she watched the energy start surrounding Naruto blade. She had seen Naruto use it a few times but he was so quick and he refused to answer any questions about what was so special about it. When he was training under Zabuza he always used a standard katana he bought at a weapon shop. Jiraiya was also shocked by the display. He had never seen anything like it before. Then he heard a scream of, "Roar for me Kyuubi," and Naruto disappeared in a yellow flash. Naruto charged in a yellow flash only to appear behind Orochimaru putting his sword back into its sheath. Orochimaru blinked and suddenly spit out blood as his grasscutter fell to the ground in 3 pieces. He fell onto his knees a moment later coughing up a lot of blood and he asked, "How?" Naruto turned and walked around Orochimaru wiping some blood off of Orochimaru's mouth and started to draw a seal on his forehead and he said, "I have mastered over 11,000 jutsu. I know 30 different sword styles. I have the power of the most powerful demon ever in my body and I have been training to fight your former leader Uchiha Madara," with a sadistic smile on his face. He starts doing hand seals and stops screaming, "Shiki Fujin corpse demon seal exhaustion," and starts doing more hand seals before screaming, "Kuchios, Edo Tensai summoning, Impure World Resurrection," and stared doing even more hand seals as both Jiraiya and Tsunade run over after hearing the first sealing method. They both knew what that was, losing a son to it. Naruto continued to do hand signs as his eyes glossed over and after 200 hand seals he said, "Sealing arts, Phoenix of the immortal fire." And he started to pant. Suddenly the sky turned dark around the area and Orochimaru was scarred as he saw a figure appear in the air and he asked, "What is that?" Naruto said, "I am paying my deal with death." The figure said, "So child of the fire. Have you decided this time?" Naruto said, "Yes, and as we agreed here is your soul in exchange for the other," pointing to Orochimaru. The figure looked at Orochimaru and said, "I have been waiting patiently for this soul for some time. I agree. One soul for one soul. One body for one body. Know this child. You cannot start over Aegean." Naruto nodded and said, "Do me one last favor. Tell the fox I said thanks." The figure pulled out his knife and walked over to Orochimaru and grabbed him before cutting him and eating each of his limbs. The figure then after finishing reached into his stomach and pulled out a spirit and puked blood and flesh over the spirit. Everyone were shocked, disgusted and interested all at the same time. Finally the spirit went face first on the ground and the figure said, "See you in time kid." And he disappeared just like he came. Naruto started to cough and spit out some blood as he fell to the ground on his knees. He smiled and said, "Thanks Shinigami and you also Kyuubi." He sat there a few minutes. Tsunade finally walked over to him and asked, "Are you alright?" Naruto smiled and said, "Like I told you. I break all odds. Perhaps you should check on your son now." Tsunade blinked and turned back toward the body that was on the ground when it groaned and slowly stood up but and he turned making everyone except Naruto gasp. Jiraiya said in a stuttery voice, "Arashi. Is that you?" Arashi looked around and blinked a few times and said, "What the hell? Last thing I remember was fighting some damn fox and telling my son I am sorry." He then received a scroll upside the head and turned and blinked and Naruto said, "Get your old dressed dad. I don't want to look at it." Arashi blinked and looked down only to turn red as he realized he was. He grabbed the scroll and walked behind a tree and started to change. Naruto sighed and said, "Gaara. Come here a minute." Gaara walked over and asked, "What?" Naruto fell back on the grass face up and said, "Use your sand and pull my sword out of its sheath and lay it on my chest. Don't touch it with your body or it will kill you." Gaara nodded and did as told. Naruto closed his eyes and suddenly a green glow surrounded him and his sword for a few minutes. When he opened his eyes everyone was around him looking at him and Arashi was dressed and said, "What's going on?" Naruto stood up and said, "I just restored some of my chakra. I used about 90% of my chakra to perform that jutsu to bring you back. Now if you will excuse me I have one more thing to take care of." As he walked toward the clearing where the headless body he killed earlier was and he acted like he was going to sheath his sword only to drive it into the ground quickly and then twist the blade. He then pulled it back out of the ground and it was covered in blood. Tamari asked. What the hell was that, Narukun? Naruto sighed and said, a spy. Gaara, can you do the honors? I don't want to use any more chakra for a few minutes. Gaara nodded and used his sand to move the ground, and a Venus flytrap looking man fell on the ground dead. Naruto reached down and removed a ring on his finger and throwing it in the air, cutting it to pieces with his sword before sheathing it. Arashi looked around and said, would someone please explain what the hell is going on and how I am alive, and is that my son? Naruto walked over and activated his eyes and touched Arashi on the forehead and said, memory implant jutsu. He then did a few hand seals and said, Kitsune force field deactivate. And a white light was seen. Arashi blinked a few minutes and said, I am going to kill them. Naruto said, not now, you're not. You have a date waiting on your head in the village and she has waited a long time for you. There is a marker there so you can use the Hiraishin jutsu. Arashi nodded and was gone in a flash. Naruto sighed and said, did any of them have any scrolls? Kankura came back and it worked out where they had 2 sets. Naruto nodded and looked at his grandparents and said, go get the 2 idiots and bring them to the tower. Gaara, I hate to ask but can you get me? And he fell face first on the ground. Tsunade ran over and checked him and sighed before saying, chakra exhaustion. Would you mind, Gaara? Gaara smirked and said, what's family for? And he grabbed his family and Naruto and they all disappeared in a swirl of sand. To those who feel this chapter is repeating some stuff and is boring, it was necessary because of the event of the next chapter. Note Sasuke ultimate punishment will be in the next chapter. Defy Natalie. After the sand sibs and Naruto left in a swirl of sand, Jiraiya looked over at the guy stuck in tree roots and said, so what should we do him? Tsunade had a couple of tears running down her face and said, I don't care. Our son is back alive. Jiraiya smiled and the guy said, please let me go so I can kill you all. Orochimaru-sama is dead. Jiraiya smirked and said, my never felt safer than it does right now. The guy screamed out in frustration and tried to activate his curse seal only for the roots around his body to get tighter, making him stop. Tsunade looked at him and said, the more chakra you use the tighter it gets. And he pulled out a flare and shot it into the air and grabbed Tsunade and they both disappeared in a swirl of leaves. A few minutes later ABNU appeared and when they saw the scene around them they asked, what happened? The idiot was so devoted he said, they killed Orochimaru-sama. Let me go so I can kill them. The ABNU sweat dropped and Ibiki and Anko appeared and Anko looked around and said, where's Orochimaru? The guy screamed and started to cry and the ABNU said, he said they killed him but I don't see a body. Jiraiya appeared right then and Ibiki asked, where's Orochimaru body? Jiraiya started to laugh and said, the Hebatem is in the belly of the death god right now. The Gaki made a deal with death. Anko started to cry and said, is Narukun dead? Starting to freak out. Jiraiya snorted, making her give him a death glare, and he said, nope. He made a trade. Orochimaru for Arashi. Everyone's sweat dropped and Ibiki said, how? Jiraiya said, I don't really know but the Gaki used most of his chakra to do it though. Ibiki sighed and said, then it is probably impossible to do it, Aegean. Only he has enough chakra. Jiraiya nodded and looked at the guy still in the trees and said, he's one of Orochimaru's Gakis, so watch him. He uses bones from his own body in attacks. Ibiki nodded and said, go find Yamato and have him free this and take him to my playroom, as he turned to look at Anko and Jiraiya. Anko sighed and asked, so how is the Gaki going to tell everyone about why his team is there? That Shino kid already figured out you were fakes before the test according to the surveillance videos. Jiraiya sighed and said, who knows? He has a plan, so I won't worry. I got research to do. And he left in a swirl of leaves. Anko sighed and shushined to the tower to wait for all the teams. Rin was drinking a sip of sake when she felt a chakra pulse behind her. She sighed and put her glass down without looking back and said, so who is this surprise my son set me up with? A voice that made her freeze on the spot said, I don't know, Claus. He just told me to come here. Rin turned slowly to look at the figure behind her and her eyes got bigger as each inch closer she got to him. She was at this point on her hands and knees, turning completely over, and she whispered, Arashi-kun. Arashi smiled and said, I know that position pretty well if I as he was tackled to the ground and had a pair of sharpened canine teeth embed into the side of his neck as two sets of claws grabbed onto his side and ripped into his flesh. He hissed as they stopped rolling. Rin, after removing her mouth from the side of Arashi's neck, moved her hands to her mouth and licked the blood off of them and looked up into his eyes and said, "It is you, but how?" Arashi smiled and said, "My little claw, what have I told you about going for blood on the first strike?" Rin smiled and blushed and said, "Never draw more than you can stand, because the moment you do you will be unable to stop the blood flow." Arashi leaned down and kissed her on the lips and she shushined them to her room. When the Sand Sibs and Naruto arrived in the tower, it had only been 4 hours since the second test had started. Naruto was still passed out, but Temari went to treat him for any wounds. She checked, and beside a small cut on his hand he was fine and the cut was healing fast. She sighed and looked on at her fiancé with pride and admiration. A few moments later, Kakashi, Shizune and Tsunade arrived with Sasuke and Sakura, who were still in a medical coma. Kakashi looked over at Naruto and said, "So what exactly happened to my student?" Naruto, who had his eyes closed, said, "I kicked a Sanins, killed an S-class missing nin, made a deal with death and survived. What's it to you?" Making everyone sweat drop. Tsunade walked over and started to run a medical jutsu on him as her eyes got bigger and looked at him and asked, "How are you restoring chakra so fast?" Naruto sighed and said, "My sword. When I had Gaara place it on my body earlier, it activated the medical seal I placed on it and it has been pumping chakra back into me. I say in about an hour I should be back at full strength." Gaara's eyes were big and he said, "But that's impossible. You have more chakra than all of us put together. How can your sword have that much chakra in it?" Naruto smirked and said, "That's one of the many reasons I named it Kyuubi. As you know, every person spends a little chakra to live, and when we are not doing nothing but walking or whatever besides battle, the rest of our chakra is just stored to a point where we don't produce more. My sword has two important seals I placed on it. One is whenever I am not using more than 5% of my chakra, it is draining 10% off of me. However, if I run almost out of chakra, I can place it near my heart and it sends the chakra back into me." Kakashi said, "But you could only hold so much chakra in your sword. Not enough to fully restore you." Naruto chuckled and said, "That's another reason for the name. Kyuubi was known for having unlimited chakra. 10% of my chakra is enough chakra to make Chidori's all day, Kakashi. The sword compresses and stores unlimited amounts of chakra. I could restore myself at least 100 times before I ever put a dent in this sword. I have charged it since I was 5 years old, Kakashi. Think about it. Now if someone will put me in a room to sleep, my body is locked up so I can't move from the deal I made. I lost over 90% of my chakra in 4 minutes, so it is in shock. When I recover I will take care of the butch and his bitch." As he fell asleep. Just then Anko arrived and looked at the group and said, "Will someone tell me what is going on?" Kakashi was pale as he looked at the sword and he started to reach for it to get a better look when Gaara's sand wrapped around his hand, and Kakashi looked at Gaara and he said, "Naruto made me use my sand to put it on his body. He said it would kill me if I touched it." Kakashi nodded and Anko screamed in frustration, "What's going on? I know that Orochimaru dead, but why is Narukun out cold as well as his teammates?" Everyone looked at each other and Kankuro said, "We will let Naruto explain when he wakes up, Aegean," as he ran into the tower to get away from her. He had heard stories from Naruto about his other fiancés. Anko looked at his retreating form and asked, "What's his problem?" Making everyone wonder. Kakashi sighed and said, "So what's the deal with death he was talking about?" Just then the sounds of a wild animal was heard echoing across the forest of death and into the tower. Everyone looked out the doors and Kakashi took a step backwards and said, "The last time I heard something like that was about 9 months before the Kyuubi attack. I wonder what is making those noises and why it has returned now." Tsunade and Temari looked at each other and then burst out laughing as they grabbed Naruto and took him toward a Vicent room in the tower. Kakashi's sweat dropped and looked at Anko and asked, "Can you help me with these two?" Pointing toward Sasuke and Sakura. Anko smirked and said, "Sorry Kakashi, they're your team," as she turned to follow the others. Kakashi turned to look at Gaara and Gaara stuck out his hand palm up. Kakashi looked at him questioningly and he said, "I am not a taxi service. You want my help as $50 per step." Kakashi paled and said, "It." As he created a cage bunchen and picked up his students and followed to the room to where Naruto was being put in a bed. Kakashi puts his other two students in the same bed and think it's not like it has not happened before, and turns to leave only for an arm to block his path. Kakashi blinks and looks at Tsunade and she said, "You are going to stand guard over them until Naruto wakes up and revives the other two, got it?" Kakashi just nods and sat down in the recliner and pulls out his ICHA book and starts to read. Tsunade has a vein pop up at the book but turns to the others in the room and screams, "Out!" And everyone leaves quickly, not wanting to get hurt by a Sanin. Kakashi sighs and looks at his students and asked, "How did you ever deal with this, sensei?" As he pulls out his book and starts to read. The next morning Naruto awoke and got out of bed and looked around and saw that Sasuke and Sakura were in the same bed and Kakashi was asleep in a chair. He smirked as he put his hand to his chin and thought, "I wonder what I should do to them now. I need to ruin Sasuke hopes of ever having children, so I need for something to happen to make them question that. I also need to explain to them how we got to the tower and the first test. Shit, I need to deal with Shino since he detected the exchange and probably a few others as." He snapped his fingers as a thought popped in his head. He walked over and placed a hand on both Sasuke and Sakura forehead and said, "Memory implant jutsu." A voice behind him said, "So what exactly is that, just you, huh, Naruto?" Naruto turned and saw Kakashi looking at him with his arms crossed and Naruto sighed and said, "It's a version of the Yamenko family jutsu that I came across in my travels. It lets me replace the events for up to a week in people's heads so they will forget what really happened, or in this case why they are here, without having to actually be in the exams without knowing." Kakashi looked at him and thought for a moment and asked, "So how many times have you used it on your teammates?" Naruto thought for a moment and said, "Including today 2 times. The first was on the wave mission. You don't remember, but the mist Junins we fought said something about me that compromised my position of skills and put this mission in jeopardy. I informed the Hokage of it so he knows if that helps. I had to use it on you also, which I hated, but you had already decided to use that info to help the teamwork, and that would have made the situation with Orochimaru even worse than it was." Kakashi put his book that was on his lap in his weapon pouch and stood up and said, "What are you not telling me, Naruto? You are way beyond a genin level. Hell, you are probably beyond me." Naruto chuckled and wrote something down on a scroll and tossed it to Kakashi and said, "I will make you a deal, Kakashi. I will tell you everything tonight at my home, but you have to find and bring all of the adults as well as the little heiress tonight at 7 p.m. for dinner and be ready to see a ghost from your past. You must bring them all even if you have to kidnap them. I will get the teams." And he disappeared in a swirl of flames. Kakashi opened the scroll and paled at the list of people on the list. He cursed, but he needed answers more than ever now. To find out someone has messed with your memories and not know it was unnerving. He left in a swirl of leaves to get to his task. Naruto appeared in front of Team 8 as Kurenai was explaining the rules of the second test. Everyone was shocked by the unexpected flame shushin. Shino raised an eyebrow and Kiba said, "What the hell, cuz?" Naruto sighed and said, "Thanks for keeping quiet earlier, Shino. Tonight you and your team are invited to dinner at my home at 7 p.m. Don't worry, you won't get into trouble. Senseiheim here can get you there. Sorry, but I have a lot to do. By the way, Orochimaru dead." And he left in a swirl of flames, leaving 4 shocked faces. Kurenai smiled and said, "It worked, huh, Narukun?" Her team looked at her and Hinata asked in a stuttery voice, "What do you mean, sensei?" Kurenai looked over at her team and said, "Just wait till tonight. Go get some rest and change into a cleaner cloths. I will pick you up at 645 tonight." And left in a swirl of leaves, leaving a confused team. Naruto appeared in front of the sand team and Baki blinked and said, "So Naruto, what brings you here?" Naruto looks around the room and sees Gaara and Kankuro both laying on the beds looking at him, and he walks over and leans on the wall next to Baki and holds a finger up saying one moment without words, and the door to the bathroom opens up and Tamari walks out dressed in loose casual cloths. She blinks and walks over and pulls Naruto into a kiss, and after a few moments they broke apart and Naruto said, "To answer your question, I am having a dinner at my house tonight with a few guests. It's a little formal affair at 7, but don't get too dressed up because it will be a long dinner. I hate to do this, but I still have a few others to see before then. And he flamed Shushan away. Gaara sighed and blinked, and Tamari looked at her brother and said, "So are you going to invite this mysterious woman you met the other day, Gaara?" Gaara said, "You know we can't leave the forest of death." Tamari smirked and said, "Whoever said anything about leaving the forest? Use one of your sand buncheons to ask her, or is my little brother afraid of her?" Gaara shot her a look, and Konkoro snickered until Gaara said, "At least I am interested in women." Konkoro coughed and asked, "What the hell that's supposed to mean?" Baki snorted and said, "I believe he is talking about how you always spend time with your puppets instead of looking for a woman." Konkoro sighed and said, "You're just jealous that I could have any woman I want." Tamari gave an evil grin and said, "Bet little brother." Konkoro looked at her and paled and said, "I hate your fiancé. He rubbed his gambling addiction on you." Tamari smiled and said, "And after we're married he will be rubbing more than that." Baki shot backwards with a nosebleed, and both Gaara and Konkoro paled and said at the same time, "Please don't talk about your life, sis." She smiled and said, "Find a woman before dinner tonight," as she grabbed her bag and went back in the bathroom only for a wall of sand to block her path. She looked at the wall and a dark aurora appeared, and Tamari said, "Gaara, do you know what the punishment is for messing with a woman when she is getting ready for a date?" Gaara's sand dropped and he started to back away from the now demonic-looking Tamari. In the room with Sasuke and Sakura. Sakura started to stir, and as she got up memories flashed in her head and she screamed before running out of the room looking for a medic. Alerted by the scream, Anko appeared and asked, "What's wrong?" Sakura recognized the woman and said, "It's Sasuke-kun. He tripped in the forest when we were looking for our scrolls and he fell on a tree limb, crushing his nuts. Naruto used a medical just you on him but said he would never have children. I don't believe him, so please get someone to check him out before it's too late." With tears going down her face. Anko had to hold it in to keep from laughing at that story. She nodded and left to get a medic, and though what a klutz. Naruto sighed as he appeared in the forest of death. He had already felt the chakra signal for Team 9 and 10. Both teams were looking at each other. Naruto closed his eyes and felt around the forest for two teams. He found them and put his hand on his sword before disappearing. Team 9, or Team Guy as some called it, were looking at Team 10. Neji had activated his bloodline and looked at each of the opponents and sighed before saying, "Don't waste our breath. They don't have the scroll we need." Lee pumped his fist in the air to shout about the power of youth, only to meet a body that was falling from the sky above them. Everyone was caught off guard by this and looked around and saw 5 other bodies falling one after another, appearing out of thin air in less than 2 seconds. Neji had activated his eyes and was looking, and all he saw was blurs of chakra leading to and from the clearing. He looked at the teams and noticed that they had a total of 3 scroll and 2 of them were the ones they needed. He walked over to the guy Lee had punched and grabbed the scroll before taking off toward the tower. Tenten and Lee looked at each other and then took off after him. Ino watched them leave and asked, "What was that all about and what happened?" Shikamaru sighed and started to search the other men and found the scroll they needed and said, "This just got troublesome." Naruto appeared in the clearing immediately after that and said, "Get to the tower. You all have a dinner arrangement tonight at 7 p.m. Get dressed and cleaned up." And disappeared, Aegean still with his hand on his sword. Shikamaru looked where he was and Choji asked, "How did he do that?" Shikamaru muttered, "Troublesome. Come on," and started toward the tower. Naruto appeared back in his living room and saw his mother and father both cuddling in a blanket on the couch. Arashi's eyes were as big as a silver dollar and he said, "Naruto, what was that you just did?" Naruto sighed as he walked over to the wine cabinet and got a bottle of sake before putting his hand on his sword, and 10 Kajunbunshians appeared and went into the kitchen as the original walked over and sat in his recliner and said, "I call it flash step. It's like Hiraishin but requires no seals." Arashi sat up and said, "But how? I worked for years on that theory and never even came close." Naruto sighed as he took a sip and said, "It only requires 2 things to actually use it. Either you have to see what's in front of you or know exactly where you are going to appear. The jutsu carries you up to 100 yards on the initial takeoff, or if it's a long distance travel then it slows you down enough the last 100 yards to make sure your stopping spot is clear. I incorporated it into Kyuubi here because the chakra control required is incredible, but it also uses very little chakra, as he SATs the bottle down. Rin looks at her son and asked, "How did you do it?" Naruto sat back and closed his eyes and said, "It all started when." Flashback to a previous life. Kyuubi was in his cage and looked at Naruto and the Shinigami that had just appeared, and Kyuubi smiled and said, "Hey, since the kid has been using the phoenix power like he has, what's to stop him from always using it and never to give it up?" The Shinigami looked at Kyuubi and thought for a moment and said, "You do bring up a good question, Fox, and he can't cheat death forever." Kyuubi smiled and said, "How about giving him a reason to give it up then?" The Shinigami looked at Naruto and asked, "What do you have in mind?" Kyuubi smiled a feral smile and said, "You do know of Orochimaru, right?" Shinigami narrowed his eyes and said, "Of course I know that foolish mortal. He is causing me a lot of headaches." Kyuubi said, "Then how about a trade of sorts? The kid here, when he finally gets a life he likes, gives up his phoenix power as well as gives you that headache Orochimaru, and he gets something that only you can give him." Naruto narrowed his eyes as he looked at the two being talked and was going to say something, but Kyuubi made him promise not to say anything until he was gone. A last request to allow the Kyuubi some peace and pride before he left. Shinigami asked, "And what might that be, Fox?" with contempt in his voice. Kyuubi said, "His father Arashi Kazama. Allow him to live out a normal mortal life that he would have had if I had not attacked. You get Orochimaru to play with and the heavenly power back, and Naruto gets his parent back since we don't know who his mother is." Shinigami thought for a moment and looked at Naruto, judging him, and walked over to Naruto and put his hand on Naruto's forehead and said, "Agreed." And Naruto cried out in pain. End flashback. Naruto said, "And when I woke up, Kyuubi was gone and I had the knowledge to bring Dad back. I was waiting until I knew I had everything I needed to let us be a family, and had to wait to learn who you were before I attempted it, Mom." They both nodded and Rin asked, "So what are you doing here? You know you have the exams still going on." Naruto sighed and said, "I got careless and Kakashi caught me putting memory in Sasuke and Sakura head about what happened, so they don't suspect." Arashi paled and said, "How much did you tell him?" Naruto smirked at that and said, "I only told him about the temporary memory transfer. I have never told anyone about the other one." Rin looked at both of them in confusion, and Arashi smiled and said, "Well, my little claw, you know how his memory jutsu can only replace up to a week's worth of memories that can be real or fake." She nodded and he continued, "There's another version that transfers most of your memories. Naruto has used it enough that after he brought me to life, he gave me all the memories for this life. It's like that sword he has. I know it has a lot of seals and stuff, but I don't know what they do because he knew them before. I could take time and learn it, but I want." Naruto nodded and said, "We are having company tonight for dinner. 7 p.m. Be ready, and next time used a damn privacy jutsu. We heard you both all the way to the tower." As he got up and went toward his room, leaving his parents blushing. It was almost 7 o'clock when Naruto walked downstairs. All of his guests had arrived and his Kajbunshians had escorted them to the dining room. He sighed as he walked in and took a seat at the head of the table and put his hands together with everyone looking at him. He closed his eyes and opened them, making several people gasp in shock, never seeing anything like that. He looked at everyone around the table before closing them and opening them again, showing his normal eyes. Kakashi sighed and said, "So what are we all doing here for now, Naruto, and what was that with your eyes?" A voice from the doorway said, "Good question, dipshit." Making everyone turn and pale as the Yondaime Hokage walked into the room with his wife Rin on his arm, as they both sat beside Naruto on the left. On Naruto's right was Anko, Temari, and Kurenai around the circular table. Naruto smiled as his clones brought in several different styles of meat, fish, and vegetables that was placed on a round robin in the center of the table so everyone could get whatever they pleased. After the clones left, Naruto cleared his throat to get everyone's attention. He said, "Thank you all for coming on such short notice, but with everything that has happened, I felt that you each needed to know what has been happening. I know many of you may have a lot of questions, like why you are all here and how my father the Yondaime is alive now, along with my eyes. I will answer all of those questions, but a few things needed to be told. As you all know, we started the Chunin selection exams today. What you don't know is that we had S-class criminals in the exams preparing for the destruction of the Leaf Village." Several gasps were heard and Shikamaru closed his eyes and said, "It was Orochimaru, wasn't it?" Everyone looked at him and Naruto said, Yes, the late Orochimaru was one of them. He had come to the village to put a curse seal on Sasuke Uchiha to get the Sharingan. Shino said. So that's why your teammates were replaced today then. In a way of stating facts instead of asking a question. Inoichi asked. What do you mean the late Orochimaru? Naruto smiled and said. I killed him today, and as part of an agreement with the death god I was allowed to bring my father back to life as payment for Orochimaru. The Hebatem had ticked him off. Arashi smiled and said. Perhaps it would be best if you told them everything, starting with the reason Kyuubi attacked and his true fate. This got everyone's attention, and Naruto said, Hiyashi Hyuga, what do you know about the birth of the Sharingan? Everyone turned to look at Hiyashi and he said, it is a mutation of my family bloodline. That is common knowledge. Why? Narrowing his eyes. Naruto said, you're right until you got to the mutation part. It was changed on purpose. I guess it's best to start with a Hyuga named Hyuga Madara, who later became Uchiha Madara, the first Uchiha. Kakashi said. What does this history lesson have to do with anything, Naruto? Naruto said. Everything, considering the asshole is still alive today and is currently the leader of a group of S-class criminals known as Atsuki. Hiyashi started to stand up and said, I have no intentions of wasting my time listening to your stories, as he turned to leave. Naruto closed his eyes and asked, have you ever wondered how they knew where Hinata's room was that night? Hiyashi. Making everyone look at him, and Hiyashi, Neji, and Hinata tensed. Hiyashi turned and in a cold voice said, be care. He was stopped when a blast of Ki hit him from Naruto, and Naruto sighed before saying, I was not going to show you this yet, but you forced my hand, Hyuga. Naruto then snapped his fingers and several clone walked into the room with several scrolls, and Naruto stopped the key and reached for a scroll, walked to Hiyashi and handed it to him and said, I also have info on the real reason your wife is dead. If you will sit and listen, I will share it with you. Unless you want her murderer to get away with it. Before turning and taking his seat, Aegean. After Hiyashi calmed down enough, he opened the scroll and read it before paling it and asked, how did you come by this? Naruto closed his eyes and said, when I stole the Cloud Village Forbidden Scroll, I had already heard about that event and I broke into their record office and got that along with some other things. Everyone looked at him like he was crazy, and Hinabi asked, what is in that scroll, father? Naruto said, the agreement between a Hyuga council member and the Raikage to kidnap Hinata, as well as the contact to tell the security of the house, as well as getting blueprints for her room. It was part one of 5 plans the Hyuga council has to eliminate not only Hiyashi, but his twin brother, Hinata, Hanabi, as well as the true events of how their mother was murdered. Hiyashi sat down and motioned for his family to also, and he said, you have my attention. Naruto nodded and said, Hinata, when you think of things, what does it really feel like in your head? Everyone turned to look at her and she thought for a moment and said, it's hard to concentrate at times and my head hurts a lot. Naruto smiled and said, not surprising with the inhibitor seal you had placed on you, making several people who knew seals flinch. Hiyashi looked at Naruto and asked, what do you mean? Naruto said, I only learned this thanks to my spy network I set up while I was traveling with my family. Jiraiya's is good, but mine is unstoppable. For those of you who don't know what an inhibitor seal is, it is a control seal that is often put on physicotic criminals that people can't kill to make them unable to act properly. However, that is only the first part. When combined with a chakra nullifier seal, it turns the victim into a mental time bomb that will kill itself eventually. I learned that Hinata had these seals placed on her the day she was born, and they are under the same type of genjutsu that Tsunade uses. I also learned that Hanabi has them also. Her mother died when she saw a Hyuga council member doing the sealing. He killed her to keep her quiet, but he was to help kill her later anyways. Hinata asked, what do you mean? In a stuttery voice. Naruto sighed and asked, Hiyashi, can I remove those 2 seals off of Hinata so she won't stutter anymore? Hiyashi nodded and Naruto got up and motioned for Hinata to do also. He looked at her and said, I need you to put your arms above your head, and I am sorry in advance, but it will hurt, and also I have to touch above your heart. You understand what that means, right? She looked down and nodded, and Naruto pulled out his sword and sat it across his arms as he put his hand on the back of her neck and over her heart and closed his eyes, and suddenly green, red, and blue chakra surrounded his hands and Hinata screamed for a moment, and that's all it took as the seals broke. He then removed his hands and put his sword back in its sheath, and he looked at her and asked, "So how do you feel?" Hinata blinked a few minutes and said in a calm, collected voice, "Like for the first time I can think clearly. Thank you." As she bowed, Naruto waved it off and said, "We are both equals, Hinata. You don't need to bow to me. Anyways, I know I have a lot to tell and have raised many questions, so I think we should continue." As he turned and started to sit down, only for Hiash asked, "What was the sword for?" Naruto smirked and said, "I will answer that later, Hiash. I don't want to make everyone think my name for my sword is the burden I used to bear." Smirking as several eyebrow rose at that. Kakashi, who was rubbing his temples, sighed and said, "Is anyone here not lost?" Looking around the room, seeing many faces just as confused as him. Naruto poured himself a glass of sake and drank it and said, "I guess I can cut a lot of the questions out. Kakashi, pull out that damn book of yours and tell me if you see anything unusual about it." Everyone turned to look at Kakashi as he pulled out his copy of the new Ika Ika Paradise book. He looked at it for several moments and said, "No, why?" Naruto smiled and said, "I love seals. I will let you all in on a little secret. Over my time away from the village at the age of 5, I made a lot of money doing odd jobs. During my time, I bought a lot of business where I currently have close to $10 million deposited in my account every day. 2 such companies are publishing companies. One of them makes the book Kakashi is currently holding. I had a seal designed into the cover of each book published by those companies, and unless you know how to make it appear, nobody ever will know of it. The seal is simple. I records anything anyone who has it says within 5 feet of the book. I have a jutsu scroll I made that absorbs and codes, and by telling the scroll what I want to know, all the info on that will appear. Say I want information on anything related to the village of Konoha that anyone has said in the last 90 days, my scroll will make appear. Do you get what I am saying now?" Comprehension dawned on everyone's faces and they all looked at him, and Shino Dad said, "That would mean that you can spy on almost anyone from anywhere." Naruto nodded and said, "That's how I found out about Orochimaru coming today, as well as his plans. I also learned about the truth of certain events in the Hyuga Council because they discussed them, and one member talks out loud when he writes in his journal." Naruto reached into his stack of scrolls and opened one and read, "Today that bitch Hitome discovered me when I was putting the seal on the new little head member. I had to dispose of her with a strike to the heart. I made the nurse tell Hiash that she died from complications during delivery. The fool. We should have killed him after we arranged for his brother to be killed. Soon our plan will be complete and we won't have a clan head any longer. The council will take its rightful place as the leaders of the clan, and anyone not on the council will receive the cage bird seal." He rolled up the scroll and Neji asked, "Who?" Naruto said, "Hyuga Haman. The head of the council. They discovered Hiash and his brother's plan to unite the Hyuga clan, so they made a deal with Cloud. They also made it where Hiash would get out of council meeting during the kidnapping. They knew he always took a walk after the meetings, so they set him up. Afterwards they talked your father into sacrificing himself to save his brother. They planned it so Hiash would not get rid of that damn seal you have on your head and remove their power. Without the threat of that seal they would lose what power they have and become useless." Inoichi said, "As much as we all like learning the dark secrets of the Hyuga clan, why did you invite all of us here?" Naruto smiled and said, "Thank you. Simple really. Even with my father alive, Aegean, me and my 2 grandparents who are Sanins, after my marriages to my fiancés here, we will still be one of the weakest family in the village. I am no fool, and I know the hatred the villagers hold for Kyuubi will not ever go away even with threats, so I am looking for a way to protect my future family. No matter how strong we each are, we can't be everywhere and we could die at any time, so I want my family to have the protection of the other clans. Especially any children. I don't want them to have to go through what I did. I know you are all thinking that sounds good and all, but what's in it for us? Why should we risk our necks for your clan? That is why, in exchange for protection should the need ever arise, I have something you all will love." He reached over to a tray of scrolls that were all nice and neat and said, "Today during the exams. How many of you heard me brag about winning something in a poker game?" Everyone looked around and Hinata said, "You said you won 20 summoning contracts." Naruto smiled at the now confident Hinata and said, "Yes. It is not no, but if a summoning family is not happy with their current summoners, they can find an arbitrator to find them a new summoner. I discovered this when talking with my two main summons, Toads and Slugs, and I was able to set up a challenge to prove I was worthy of being the arbitrator. I passed and got them, so I am willing to give them to your clans based on the summons as well as 10 jutsu of whatever element the head of the clan is aligned to. Arashi smirked and said, exactly how many jutsu do you have in that library you made, son? Naruto smiled, knowing his dad knew this answer to make everyone bug-eyed, as he said, I only have a little over 11,000 jutsu. Giving each of the clans 10 jutsu won't affect our library. Ino asked, how do you have so many jutsu? Naruto took another sip of sake and said, simple really. I stole every village but this one's in Suna Forbidden Scroll, as well as copied every jutsu in their libraries and traded jutsus with missing nin on my travels unless I was hunting them. It quite easy actually. Inoichi said. There's no way you could have done that. It would have taken hundreds of people as well as incredible skills to do that. Naruto placed his hand on his sword and disappeared from sight and returned a moment later holding 4 huge scrolls and said, here are the forbidden scrolls from Iwa, Cloud, and Mist, and Rain Village. As for the libraries, I know a jutsu that created duplicates of any document, and whenever I can make 1000 of Kujbunshians at a time, taking out all the jutsu in a library can be done in as little as 15 minutes at night. Then I just flash step out of the village and no one is the wiser until I am long gone. As for my skills, I am very talented. In fact, this house we are all in. Hiyash, if you would be so kind as to look outside at our surrounding and tell everyone what you see, since no one came through the front door. Hiyash did and gasped and said, where are we? We are in a tree a few hundred feet in trees. Naruto said, yes, my family home I built is hidden by a powerful genjutsu seal, so even though I tell you this house is in the forest of death, unless you know exactly where, you will never find it. As for being off the ground, I used my bloodline to do that. Now I will answer a few questions before we get to business. You asked what was with my eyes. To answer that, I have completely absorbed all of the power and knowledge of the Kyuubi no Kitsune that my father sealed inside me the day after I was born. With that, I learned to make my family bloodline stronger so that every one of my children will be able to control plants instead of a random one. The eyes I created to battle the final level of the Sharingan so I can kill me 3 Uchiha. Everyone was looking and Ino said, why are you going to kill Sasuke-kun? Naruto chuckled and said, why would I kill that sterile jerk? Kakashi asked, what do you mean sterile, and there are only 2 Uchiha left? Sasuke and his brother. So who are you talking about? Getting several nods. Naruto sighed and said, when we were on the mission to Wave, I had to check Sasuke for injuries and I ran a medical jutsu and learned that he was sterile. As for the 3 Uchiha I mentioned, I am planning on killing Uchiha Madara before he tries and destroys the world by releasing his master, the 10-tailed demon. The next one I plan to kill is Uchiha Itachi. The last one will make you, Kakashi, my mother Rin, and my father Arashi upset. Arashi looked at him and asked, what do you mean, son? Naruto looked at them and said, the last one I will kill is Tobi, or as you know his is Uchiha Obito. Kakashi slammed his fist on the table, Rin gasped and Arashi paled, and he said, but Obito's dead. I saw his body. Naruto said, you're right, he was dead, father. Madara used a version of Orochimaru Kuchio's Edo Tensei summoning, Impure World Resurrection, to bring him back to life, but he was fused with another person who was mentally disturbed, and he has the brains of a 7-year-old child but the skills to fight a Sannin. He is also completely under the one who brought him back to life. Uchiha Madara. The same one who offered 100 of his descendants as payments to Kyuubi for the Sharingan to free him from the Hyuga cage bird seal. That's the reason Kyuubi attacked back then. To get his payment. Everyone was sitting absorbing all the information, and Hiyash said, you have given me a lot to think about. I am curious about the summoning contracts as well as jutsu. Kakashi, who finally gotten over his shock of learning the person who gave him his eye was still alive, asked, what about that memory jutsu you used today? Naruto sighed and said, like I told you, I implanted a fake memory in both of their brains so they think they took the test, and then we defeated a team from Mist before making it to the tower. I also implanted a memory for Sasuke to blame being sterile on, so that way perhaps someday someone might be able to fix him or something. Inoichi asked, what kind of jutsu lets you do that? Naruto smirked as he knew he had one and said, it's a version of you family jutsu that allow you to enter a person's mind. I ran into a man who was friends with one of your ancestors when he was a child and he modified it so he could implant 1 week worth of fake memories so that way he could hide from hunter nins by making them think they got a lead of him heading somewhere else and then he goes elsewhere. Inoichi said. Instead of element jutsu, would you give me that one with whatever summon you want to give me? Naruto smiled and said, sure, the cats will love your family. They hate their current summoners with a passion and won't answer them because of the crime they committed. Inoichi asked, who are their current summoners and what crime is that? Naruto said, though the ones that are alive right now don't know they have it, the Uchiha clan are their current summoners and the crime that committed was sealing 30 of the cats in our world after summoning so they can never return. One such cat ever person here has seen once and never realized it was a summon creature, making Inoichi eyes get big as he heard who their summoners were. He then asked, who is the summon we all seen but have not realized it? Naruto chuckled and then turned to full-blown laughter and he looked at Kakashi and asked, what was our first mission that I made Kajbunshin henge into Kakashi? Kakashi thought for a moment and his one eye got big and he said, you mean to tell me? Naruto smirked and said, why do you then? I told her Sasuke was an Uchiha in cat language so she would attack him. Ino asked, who are you talking about? Kakashi said one word and everyone paled, Tora. Arashi spit out his drink and said, that damn cat is still around. Naruto said, now and forever thanks to the Uchihas. Naruto on a roll said, well, since it was stolen by a branch member from your family 200 years ago, the Hyuga will get the Falcon contract Aegean, making Hiyashi eyes get big. Naruto continued, the Aburame clan will get the only bug summon that rivaled them during the last war. The B contract from Iwa. Enko, you will get the snake contract and don't worry about having to give human sacrifices like Orochimaru did. He only did that after Orochimaru started summoning his children to experiment on. The Akamiki family will get the boar contract from Cloud. The Nara clan will get the hawk contract. Kakashi, you have until I count to 5 to ask her out on a date or you can kiss your contract goodbye and I will tell her. Puckin is tired of hearing you moan about wanting to date her and I am tired of getting it in my reports from my scrolls. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. Kakashi looked confused and Naruto said, okay chicken shit, Hana, dipshit over there has the hots for you but he won't tell you about it. Kiba jumped up and said, what the hell cuz? That's my sister. Naruto said, shut it cuz, Hana has liked him also but Puckin said I could threaten Kakashi with his contract to get him off his case. He has ran up a high mental doctor bill. As for you cuz, same deal, tell her or you're toast. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Kiba jumped up and said, Hinata, will you go out with me? Making everyone sweat drop and Hinata red face as she said, I will think about it. Kiba growled and turned to Naruto and said, I am going to Ki. His words were stopped by Naruto appearing behind him and Choji asked, what is that you are doing? I can't keep up with it. Arashi said, no one can. Calmly and in a low voice that everyone heard. Kakashi asked, is it Hiraishin? Arashi said, no. Naruto created the ultimate jutsu there. He calls it flash step. It makes my Hiraishin look like I was running without weight on compared to the real Hiraishin. Naruto sighed and said, chill cuz. Even I have to pay my prices for things. I made a deal with the summons so I had to follow through. Kiba asked, then why did you make me tell? Naruto smiled and said, tell him. Barking could be heard and Hana, Rin and her sister all three sweat dropped as Akamaru was talking to Kiba. While everyone was busy talking, Naruto walked over to Neji and slipped a scroll into his hand and mouth read in private. As he walked by him and took his seat, he turned and said, that just leaves the Naris and the Inazaka. Both of you should feel honored with your contracts. The Naris were awarded the Golem summons. They respect knowledge and have not had a summoner in over 300 years. The Inazaka's clan was asked to receive this contract but no one would ever offer it to them for fear of being attacked. Hana asked, what summon is it? Naruto said, the lion summons. The last person they had to come to give it to your clan, though lions and dogs would not get along because of them being from two main different affiliates. That's all of them and of course the 10 jutsu as well, so do we have a deal? Each of them looked at each other and Hiyashi thought for a moment and Shikamaru asked, why did we get 2 contract Naruto? Naruto looked at him and said, there is a reason for that. Though I said that it was awarded to the Nara clan, it was actually awarded to you, Shikamaru. You may have not known it, but a man came and challenged you to a game of Go and Shogi back to back one day. That man was actually the head summon for the golems. After you impressed him with your IQ, he wanted to give you the contract, but they cannot be just given to people. They have to be given by another human who has their blessings. Hiyashi asked. Why? Why did you bring all this info about my clan to my attentions? Could have just made the same deal with my clan as you are with the others that are here. Looking at Naruto. Naruto sighed and said, you all heard me try on several times to tell you about Uchiha Madara, right? Well, I also mentioned that he is trying to free his boss, the Ten-Tailed Demon. What I have not told you is to do that requires for him to capture the creatures that sealed him in the statue he is in. In other words, he must capture the other 9-tailed demons. With me absorbing Kyuubi, he can no longer achieve this, but he could still go after the other 8 demons and still destroy the world. In order to stop him, I have been working in the backgrounds for a while. He currently has 3 demons he can use. They had not been sealed in a child like the others. Ino asked. Why would a demon need to be sealed in a child, and what did you mean earlier when you said your father sealed Kyuubi in you? We were told he was killed. Arashi said. That was a lie to protect Naruto because of the hate of the village. Yes, I know everything. Naruto showed me his life with a jutsu, so I know most of what has happened, and I am not pleased. I told the village to see him as a hero. They did not. Anyways, the reason it has to be a child. Gaara interrupted him and said, an infant is the only one that can grow with the demon's power and not be destroyed by it. But it also has to have the proper seal, making everyone look at him. Naruto smiled and said, thanks, Gaara. Yes, the other demons were sealed in a child. The only ones Madara could find now are in this room. Me being the Kyuubi, which I no longer have, and Shukaku, which is in Gaara here. Making everyone flinch. Hiyashi said, you still have not answered my question, Naruto. Naruto nodded and said, the reason I did this for you, Hiyashi, and the reason why Madara can't find the others are one and the same. I told you all how I made a lot of money. I bought an island that is hidden from the rest of the world and only a handful even know about. I put the other children there under the protection of some trusted friends. One of those friends is a Hyuga named Borlis. Yes, Hiyashi, you know of no such Hyuga. The reason why is his mother was captured during the last war and she was pregnant at the time. Luckily, she was a branch member and also a sealing expert, so when she had him, she quickly put a cage seal on him, and with the help of someone she befriended, he was allowed to escape. He grew up learning your family style of Taijutsu from a scroll and created several variations on it. I came across him when on my travels. He lived in the mountains in a cabin he built, and I asked him to return to Konoha to be with the rest of his family. He said he did not want to live in a village because of the evils he saw in his life. I respected that and I trained with him for a while. I had already began getting the vessels at that point, and I knew that they needed someone to help watch them and protect them, even though most are teenagers, a few are still children under the age of 10. They were all hated in their villages like I was, so I asked him to protect them for me. He agreed, and he is currently living a nice life on that island. The only thing he asked for me in return is for me to try and unify his family. The scroll he had learned from also had his mother's journal sealed into it, and after reading it, he wanted one house under one family. I agreed to do what I could, and so here we are. Hiyashi thought about what he heard and said, I believe you. You have shown too much proof with the new confidence from Hinata, as well as her chakra being more stable now. I noticed it earlier when you had me look outside. You said Hanabi has it on her as well. Naruto nodded and said, yes, though hers has not been activated, so I can't remove it until it does. From what I learned, they were waiting until Hinata became a branch member before they activated hers. What the hell? Gaara's eyes were big and he looked at Naruto, and both nodded before one disappeared in a swirl of sand and one in a swirl of flames. Hiyashi looked around and asked, what happened? Gaara appeared and said, get to the south side of the village now, we're under attack. Danzo and Root have joined with the Sound Village Nins and are attacking the village, and left in swirl of sand. Arashi stood and said, Genins, you are not ready for this. Explore the house, Rin, stay and make sure they're comfortable and protected. Everyone else, follow me and grab weapons and let's go. We got a war to stop. And he lead the others toward a training room that had weapons sealed. They got supplies and leave Shushine to the south side to fight. While that was happening, Naruto had Kyuubi out and was taking the fight to the enemies. After sending Gaara back to get help, he started fighting. He had already removed his sword and created 10 Kujbunshians to help as he charged. It looked like after Danzo learned of his partner Orochimaru's death, he took immediate actions and started an attack on the village himself. Naruto sliced a kunia that was heading at him with his sword as he ducked under a right hook. Suddenly the area was covered in a thick fog and Naruto asked, "What the hell took you so long?" Laughter could be heard and a female voice said while the laughing was going on, "Sorry Naruto-kun, Zabuza was torturing a poor asshole who tried to grab my." Zabuza stopped laughing and said, "So what's the story, kid?" Naruto sliced the head of a nin who could not detect chakra and said, "Danzo must have heard I killed Orochimaru and seized control of his army en route ABNU to attack the village. Just look for the Neon Theer mask and you know they are okay to kill." Zabuza said, 22. What about you, kid? Naruto sliced one from groin to neck and said, 29. A scream of, "My flames of youth are diminished, I have only killed 20. Haku said, "I am at 19 inches. A new voice said, "Can we restart count since we just got here?" Naruto chuckled and said, "Sorry dad, but if we did that you would use Hiraishin." Arashi sighed as he flung a kunia toward a group of people heading toward the village walls and said, "Well, aren't you using flash step?" Naruto said, "No, right now I am using silent killing." A voice that sounded aggravated said, "What the hell do you mean silent killing? You are all weak idiots. We can hear you all and you can quit trying to be all badass." Zabuza stopped the fog and when it cleared, the guy who said that was standing in the middle of a group of dead of about 80 bodies, and on his right was Naruto with his sword pointing at the guy's heart. On his left was Zabuza with his sword at the guy's neck, and Haku was in behind him with a senbon at his temple, making everyone who stopped and looked at the carnage sweat drop and think the same thing the guy in the middle was thinking. "I am so screwed," as he fainted. Gaara's voice said, 51. Naruto sweat dropped and looked at his future brother-in-law to the far right and saw one of Gaara's new attacks, the sand ring, coming away from a large group on ninja necks. It puts a choker collar around the person's neck and suffocates them. He no longer had to use the large wave of sands or a lot of it to kill now that he could control it right with a proper seal. Naruto then looked over at the 300 remaining nins. He looked back around the field. Hiash had around 30 people dead in a circle around him. Kakashi had about 27 as he and Guy were back to back, and Guy had about 27 also. He then looked and saw the third Hokage had about 20 dead beside him with Enma in staff form. The Ino, Shika, Cho group had around 30 around them dead. Hana and her mother had about 15 around them with Theer dogs in a defensive position. Arashi had 25 dead and several Hiraishin kuniyas on the ground. Anko had her snakes retracting from the neck of a guy with about 14 around her, and Kurenai had 7 by her as she removed the kuniya from the neck of the one she had in a genjutsu as he fell to the ground dead. Baki and Hiati had about 40 around them, both with Theer swords out. It looked like the leaf had acted quickly and taken out several. Naruto saw a few ABNU and a dead. He looked and did not see any Chunin and Genins and figured the third had them protecting the villagers. Clapping could be heard and everyone turned and looked at Danzo as he walked to the front of the group with 50 root members beside him. He said, "I knew we should have made you a weapon boy." He then turned and looked at the third and said, "Your days in power are over." The third said, "You are wrong, Danzo." Suddenly several people appeared beside Danzo and Naruto narrowed his eyes and saw the third former teammates, and one of them said, "We of the council feel that because of your actions not letting us kill him when he was younger, he has become too much of a threat. Today's action with him killing Orochimaru is proof that he is too strong and the demon must be in control. We are eliminating you, Saratobi, and instating Danzo as the new Hokage." Arashi stepped up and said, "Really? What gives you that power?" Making both of them pale, not noticing the Yondaime back alive and here. Chuckles could be heard and everyone turned to Naruto, and Naruto looked at the third and said, "By the laws of the village, what they just did is treason, Hokage-sama. They forfeited their rights as citizens of Konoha the moment they sided with another village against our own. What are your orders?" Making everyone who did not know who was in charge know then. The third said, "It pains me to say this, but the punishment for this is death. Leave now or I will be forced to. He was interrupted as Danzo said, "Shut up, you old asshole. You are too old and weak to protect this village. See ya. Kill the Hoka." Ki from Naruto made everyone stop and Naruto flicked his sword to get the blood off of it and he pointed the blade reversed and chakra began to gather around it. 9 energy trails circled it. Everyone was wondering what he was doing. Jiraiya and Tsunade both arrived and looked at the carnage. They had been in a hot spring on the other side of town drinking together and only noticed the battle when they felt the chakra spikes, so they had to get dressed before coming. Naruto lowered his head and said, "I am sorry for what I must do now. I know you wanted to spare them, Hokage-sama, but Danzo just signed his death warrant when he ordered his men to kill you. The Leaf Village was built with the help of the great clans like mine and the others that are here. We allowed the villagers to build and we became a village that prospered like no other. Danzo, the only ones who could have been spared were you, the former council members and your root officers. The nins behind you are an attacking army and they are not retreating when given the chance, thus forcing us to kill them, but I will allow them to leave along with you when I stop my ki. If after 1 minute no one leaves, I will protect not only the Hokage and everyone here but the village behind me. You stand as much chance against me a snowball in hell. Your choice." And he dropped the ki, never looking up. Everyone was stunned by what happened and the third looked at Naruto and said, "Thank you, Naruto. Even after they order my death you still would let them leave, so I see you truly don't want to kill them. It's in their hands now. If they don't retreat at the end on the time limit, I give you permission to stop them. Listen to me everyone. Only defend yourself and others. Let Naruto protect this village. No one interfere." As he lowered his head, Naruto nodded slightly and said, "I won't kill them, but they will never be able to fight Aegean old man if that is any consolation. I promise." The third smiled a small smile and Hiash looked on and said, "Hokage-sama, you don't mean that you will let a genin fight all of them? Even one as skilled as he appears to be can't fight nearly 400 men by himself." Arashi smiled a small smile and said, "Hiash, I will tell you something I learned from my son's memories he gave me. He hates killing more than anything. The only time he kills is when he is protecting something that is precious, whenever someone is in need, and whenever someone refuses to stop fighting. You remember the lesson on the spirit of fire the Leaf Village was founded on. To protect that which is precious to you, even at the cost of your own life. Naruto is doing that now. Even though I want to kill Danzo for what he just did, I won't interfere. To Naruto, the third is like a grandfather, just like Jiraiya is. He promised not to kill them and he never breaks a promise." Naruto said, 30 seconds left. Run and don't come back." Everyone could hear the sadness in his voice. They all looked at him and saw a few tears going down his face. Danzo started to laugh and said, "Kill them all, except the red-headed boy and the Kyuubi brat. As per our agreement, Itachi." 2 figures landed beside Danzo and Itachi and Kisame appeared and they both nodded and Itachi said, "Yes, we will deal with the Kyuubi and Shukaku." Several people flinched as laughter could be heard and Naruto said, "When this is over, no one kills Itachi. Since Sasuke sterile and can't produce heirs, we just had the only other option, walk into the village." His head still looking at the ground. Kakashi looked on and said, "Arashi sensei, Hokage-sama, Naruto can't beat Itachi and these men. It's suicide." Looking scared. Zabuza looked on and said, "Hey kid, leave the shark alone. I want him." Naruto smiled a small smile and said, "If you die I will protect Haku for you." Haku flinched as Zabuza said, "I know kid, I know, but me and Kisame have an old score to settle." Naruto said, "Time's up. Roar for me Kyuubi." And suddenly disappeared. Time seemed to stand still as everyone looked around. Suddenly he appeared back where he was a few seconds before, except he was facing the other way and was on one knee and Danzo asked, "What was?" Several shouts and screams of pain were heard from behind him and he turned and saw all of his men and the army behind him falling to the ground. He turned back and screamed, "What did you do, you monster?" Naruto rose from his knee and sheathed his sword and said, "I cut their spinal cords. They are all permanently paralyzed," still with his back to Danzo. He turned with his eyes closed and said, "Hokage-sama, Danzo and your teammates are to do with what you want. The paralyzing poison I put in them should hit any moment. They can still move and fight after healed." Asuma dropped his cigarette and asked, How did you do that, Naruto? Naruto said. My flash step allows me to move 10 times faster than the Hiraishin. It is the ultimate jutsu. Now Itachi, since you and I both know you can't beat me in speed since your Sharingan could not track me and my ninjutsu level is beyond yours as well. Let's have a battle of the minds, shall we? For the next 72 hours. Opening his eyes and locking them with Itachi except Naruto was changed to the one he designed. Itachi's had already been kanged into the final level, so when they both locked eyes they both got control. Everyone wondered what was going on except Naruto and Itachi. Suddenly a cut appeared on Itachi's arm as blood flew down and Naruto had one on his cheek. Kurenai ran over and was about to touch Naruto when a wall of sand stopped her and she looked at Gaara and he said, "Don't." He told me about this. They are in the world of the Sharingan fighting except what happens to you in there happen out here. If you touch his body you will receive the same wounds he get. Just watch. She nodded slowly. Zabuza looked at Kisame and said, "Shall we?" And they both left in a swirl of mist. A few moments before Naruto and Itachi appeared in the world of the Sharingan and Itachi was first surprised but then Naruto said, "Welcome. In this world the laws of nature don't apply right, so let's begin." And charged at Itachi with a kunai. Itachi pulled one out and charged Naruto. Naruto ducked Itachi's slice and cut Itachi on the arm, however a moment later a cut appeared on Naruto's face and Itachi looked at him and said, "I see what you mean. I thought of using wind manipulation on my weapon and it actually worked, even though I don't have a wind element. Let's begin." And they both blurred out of existence. Note, the following jutsu are as follow. Bold are from Naruto and regular are Itachi. Daikamedachi no Jutsu, Great Cutting Whirlwind Technique. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu, Fire Release. Great Fireball Technique. They both launch and Naruto flash steps away. Sweden. Suiryuden no Jutsu, Water Release. Water Dragon Bullet Technique. Doden. Doryuheiki, Earth Release. Earth Release Wall. Itachi jumps and blocks a kunai Naruto threw in the shadow of the bullets. Doden. Shinju Zanshu no Jutsu, Earth Release. Double Suicide Decapitation Technique. Itachi jumps to avoid the hands that appeared under him and sends both at Naruto. Futon. Daitapa, Wind Release. Great Breakthrough. Futon. Rinkuden, Wind Release. Drilling Air Bullet. Naruto sees the attacks and blocks with Hyero no Jutsu, Ice Prison Technique. And then creates Cage Bunshin no Jutsu, Shadow Clone Jutsu. Itachi throws a shuriken and does to kill the clones. Cage Shuriken no Jutsu, Shadow Shuriken Technique. Naruto does to stop the shurikens. Kamedachi no Jutsu, Cutting Whirlwind Technique. Itachi send these at Naruto throat the wind attack. Kaden. Hosenka no Jutsu, Fire Style. Art of the Phoenix Flower, the Touch Me Not. After dodging the attack Naruto and Itachi both do. Kaden. Karyu Enden, Fire Release. Fire Dragon Flame Bullet. Kaden. Ruka no Jutsu, Fire Release. Dragon Fire Technique. As the last two attacks cancel each other out and both of them were panting, Itachi said, "It's time we end this." A voice fills the area and said, 71 hours 59 minutes and 59 seconds left. Itachi blinks and suddenly the Naruto in front of him does some hand signs and slams his hands into the ground and said, "Mokuden Haijutsu, Jukai Koden, Wood Release Secret Technique. Birth of Dense Woodland." Itachi tries to use a Kaden Jutsu but nothing happens. He tries another and another and another and still nothing happens. He asks, "What happened?" Naruto walked over and looked at the cage Itachi was now in and waved his hand and Itachi saw the world outside but he was still inside the cage. Naruto said, "Inside here the power of the mind is absolute, Itachi. As you know this jutsu stops all demonic chakra. However what you may not know is thanks to this being a Sharingan world and that the Sharingan is from the Kyuubi that jutsu stop your power. You can't think to weaken it or free yourself because the moment you were trapped you lost all control in this world. You are trapped in your own mind now and forever. You can see the world but you are nothing but a living corpse. Unable to talk, unable to move, unable to taunt your brother. You can feel what happens to you but you won't be able to do anything. Now since your brother can't have kids your body will be used to continue the Sharingan while your little brother can't touch you because the council cares so much about bloodlines they won't let him kill you. I get revenge on both of you that way. Enjoy." And he faded away, leaving a scared Itachi. As soon as Naruto faded, he appeared back in his body and fell down toward the ground, only to be caught by a girl who appeared out of a sheet of ice in front of him as she lowered him to the ground. He smiled as the Hokage walked over and he asked Naruto, "Are you okay, Naruto?" Naruto sighed and said, "Just tired. Itachi is a prisoner in his own mind now. He can't do anything anymore, so you can restore the Uchiha clan with his body. Dad, Kakashi, can you both make sure Zabuza okay, and Dad, get the ring of Itachi hand and Kisame if he dies as well. I got to destroy them. Nighty night." And he closed his eyes and fell asleep. Danzo, who was paralyzed except for his mouth, said, "Sai, kill that boy now." A black and white ink tiger charged at Naruto and was about to pounce on him when Anko and Kurenai both appeared in front of him, only to receive a claw in the side as he passed them, but nothing serious. A wall of sand appeared and blocked the tiger before crushing down on it, destroying it. Haku stood up and looked around and saw a boy in a tree with a paintbrush, and she formed an ice mirror and stepped into it before it melted. Sai looked around and felt frost on his shoulders as he turned to look, and paled when a woman encased in a thin layer of ice where you could not see the person inside appeared behind him. She held up her hand and breathed on it, and the ice started to entrap him, and he blinked as snapped her finger, and suddenly the ice around him shattered and he felt his body scream out to him in pain as every bone was broken that was in ice. He looked at her and asked, "Is this pain?" She smiled and said, "Yes. You are the first person to ever see and live past my ultimate jutsu. Ice style. Shiva. Because of the amount of chakra it cost, I promised to only use it under one condition. I know, but I always thought Haku would make a badass looking Shiva. I don't own Final Fantasy." As the ice started to melt, and then you could see Haku as she fell to the ground below, only to be caught by a snake that appeared out of the ground. It lead her over and set her on the ground next to a panting Anko who was holding her side, as was Kurenai. Suddenly a huge wave of water came flooding into the area, and Zabuza was riding his sword like a surfboard as it was stopped by a huge tidal wave of sand which made Zabuza fly off his sword and into the air. Guy jumped into the air and caught Zabuza and asked, "What happened, my youthful friend?" Zabuza said, "That sucked. We both went to the lake over there and both used one attack and one attack only, like when we were in the Seven Swordsmen. We both created a huge tidal wave and sent it against each other, and I lost and had to ride my sword or be killed by the wave. You know the rest. What happened here?" Kakashi, who appeared next to Arashi from the direction the wave came from, said, "Naruto beat Itachi and is now a prisoner in his own mind." Anko said, "Danzo ordered the kid in the tree to kill Naruto, and Haku used some weird ice attack to make herself a goddess of ice and attack the kid." Zabuza looked at Haku, who was blushing, and started to chuckle and then laugh, and he said, "You know they will kill you, right?" Kurenai, who had Tsunade start healing her wounds, asked, "What do you mean by that, Zabuza? Who is going to kill Haku?" Zabuza said, "Haku promised that the only time she would ever use that jutsu is whenever she had to defend someone she." He stopped as a wave of ki came off of Haku, and she said, "They don't need to know that, Zabuza." Zabuza chuckled even more as he blasted her with his own ki and said, "Haku, you may be my adopted daughter, but as your father I can tell anyone I want who you love. Don't think I don't know about your fantasy of being with him and his fiancées. Our walls in our apartment are not thick enough to stop the muffled cries of Narukun, Kur-chan, and Chan," with an evil grin on his face at the look Haku had on hers. She had two thoughts on her mind right then. One, kill her father, and two, to die from embarrassment. Anko and Kurenai were both shocked and looked at each other and then down at the blushing girl who was trying to push deeper into Anko's lap from the embarrassment. Just then a figure landed, and it was Sasuke, and he looked and saw his brother and went into a rage and pulled out a kunai and charged, only for someone to grab his arm, and a voice said, "Stop." Sasuke was enraged and said, "Let me go, you son of a whore. I will kill you and your damn family, you asshole. If you don't let me go, I will kill you and your whole family, you insignificant little shit. Let me go. Can't you tell I am an Uchiha and I have to kill my brother, or are your parents so much of inbreeders that you can't even tell when your superiors are in front of you? If so, then your children should be put to death at birth." Before he tried to stab the man in the heart with a kunai. Keyword tried. The man who was holding him was Arashi Kazama. Suddenly a shitload of ki hit Sasuke, making him hit the ground unable to breath. He blinked and looked up and paled at the sight of the man he just tried to kill. the Yondaime Hokage of Konoha. Suddenly another person appeared on his right, blasting even more ki. Tsunde was there and she looked down at him and said, "Did you just call me a whore?" Another figure appeared blasting ki and it was Jiraiya, and he looked at Sasuke and said, "Inbreeders. I have you know we are not like that." A woman appeared next to them and said, "And you think my son should be put to death at birth?" Blasting more ki than all of them. I had to use this as it was just too good of an opportunity to not use. I don't own Star Wars. In a galaxy far, far away, a figure sitting in a tower with a wooden cane gasped, and a figure walks up beside him and asks, "What's wrong, Master Yoda?" Yoda said, "Pain. Lots and lots of pain." On the same planet, another figure looks toward the sky and a figure beside him asks, "What is it, Master?" The figure said, "A great evil is being unleashed on the universe, Darth Maul. Someone is about to meet the true power of the dark side." On a droid command ship above the planet Naboo, several light years away from Yoda, a figure said, "I sense a great disturbance in the Force, Master." Back with Sasuke. Itachi watched in fear for his little brother as the wrath that is about to befall him, and he whispers, "I am sorry." Notice. The next few scenes should only be read by those who truly hate Sasuke. Enjoy. Soon picked him up and threw Sasuke into the air. Rin jumped in the air and clawed both his arms. Arashi appeared behind Sasuke and stuck a Hiraishin Kuniya in his. Kurenai cast a genjutsu to make his sense of touch heightened. Anko sent snakes out of her hands and they bit into his legs. Haku pierced his ears with senbons. Tsunade summoned Katsuya and used her as a springboard to kick him higher into the air. Jiraiya summoned Gambunta and had the toad boss spit oil into the air, which he ignited. Gaara used his sand to hurl Sasuke back toward the planet. Tamari, who arrived with the other genins just in time to hear what Sasuke said, used her fan to increase his speed. Kiba and Hand both jumped into the air and clawed his legs as he fell and bounced off the ground, only for a tidal wave to catch him and swirl him into a vortex, and Haku froze the water around him. Konkuro sent Crow in and plant explosive tags around the human popsicle and had them explode. Hinata walked over and used the Hake Rokujuin Sho, 8 trigrams 64 palms, on him and made him fall, making several people raise eyebrows. Neji, after reading the note from his father and everything he heard tonight, decided since he already hated Uchiha, he would take out some frustration and used a kaidan to fling him into the air. Surprisingly, the only person who felt sorry for him was the one who caught him. Sakura. Naruto groanded awake while this was going on and asked Kakashi what happened. After Kakashi told him, he waited until Sakura landed and walked over and said, "Guess what, Sasuke? Since you can't have kids, I was going to kill him, but since I knew you wanted to restore your clan, I captured your brother for you so that way you can restore your clan. Isn't that great?" With a smile on his face. Tora walked up and looked at Sasuke before turning around, lifting her tail and kicked dirt on him before she ran off. End of Sasuke abuse. The third finally got over his shock of the stupidity of Sasuke as well as what happened and walked over and cleared his throat and said, "Okay everyone, good job and thank you for dealing with this problem quickly. I will have someone take the wounded to the hospital and get ABNU to clean this mess up." Dismissed. Everyone started to leave and Naruto sighed and stopped in mid-step, and Rin saw this and asked, "What's wrong, son?" Naruto groaned and fell face first Aegean to the dirt. Tsunade ran over to him and started to do a medical jutsu as several others started to surround him, and Hiash asked, "What's wrong?" Tsunade finished her scan and said, "His body in shock from chakra exhaustion, Aegean." Arashi looked at his son and said, "Come on, let's get you some rest." As picked him up and left in a swirl of leaves.